The Whitmore house smelled like rising bread and simmering resentment. Eliza knelt in the kitchen corner, scrubbing yesterday's dinner plates while her sisters laughed in the front room. Their voices carried through the thin walls, bright musical sounds that made strangers turn their heads on the street. Sarah's soprano trill, Margaret's alto warmth, Caroline's breathy giggle that made men forget their own names. And then there was Eliza. She dunked another plate into the wash basin, her hands red and cracked from the lye soap. The water had gone cold an hour ago, but she didn't bother heating more. Her mother would only complain about wasting firewood for someone who didn't need to look pretty anyway. "Eliza!" Her mother's voice cut through the afternoon quiet like a blade. "The chamber pots need emptying." She dried her hands on her apron, a gray, shapeless thing that had belonged to her grandmother, and headed upstairs. Behind her, she heard Caroline whisper something that ended in muffled laughter. Eliza's ears burned, but she kept walking. The April sun slanted through the upstairs window, illuminating dust motes that danced like they had somewhere better to be. Eliza paused at the landing, looking out at Kansas territory stretching flat and brown to the horizon. The town of Millbrook sat dying in the distance, its population bleeding away year after year as the railroad passed them by. 3 churches for a town of 200 people, 4 saloons, 1 general store that extended credit nobody could afford to pay back. This place was a tomb, and Eliza had been buried in it since birth. She collected the chamber pots mechanically, holding her breath against the smell. At 23, this was her life. Wake before dawn, start the cooking fire. Prepare breakfast for 5 people while eating whatever remained in the pan. Wash dishes. Mend clothes. Empty chamber pots, scrub floors, pull weeds in the garden. Prepare dinner, clean again. Sleep on a cot in the kitchen because the upstairs bedrooms belonged to her sisters. And through it all, listen to those sisters prepare for lives Eliza would never have. Sarah was engaged to the Methodist minister's son, a soft-handed clerk who wrote terrible poetry and owned 3 suits. Margaret had attracted a traveling salesman from St. Louis who promised to send for her once his business prospects improved. Caroline, the youngest at 19, had half the unmarried men in the county competing for her attention like dogs over a bone. Nobody competed for Eliza. "Your face is unfortunate," her mother had told her when she was 12. "Not unkindly, just matter of fact, the way you'd comment on bad weather. But you're strong, and you can work. Some widower with children might take you eventually, if you're lucky." Eliza had stopped looking in mirrors after that. She hauled the chamber pots downstairs to the outhouse, emptied them, scrubbed them clean with sand and water from the pump. Her back ached from leaning over the wash basin all morning. Her fingers stung from a dozen small cuts accumulated over years of kitchen work. She was 23 years old and felt 50. When she returned to the kitchen, her sisters had gathered around the table, their heads bent over something that made them squeal with delight. Caroline saw her first. "Oh, Eliza!" She waved a hand in mock distress. "Come look at this. We need your opinion." Eliza approached warily. Her sisters only asked her opinion when they wanted entertainment. Margaret held up a newspaper. The Western Matrimonial News, one of those mail-order bride publications that circulated through frontier territories. The pages were filled with advertisements from men seeking wives, women seeking husbands, all reduced to brief descriptions that read like livestock auctions. "Listen to this one," Margaret said, barely containing her laughter. "Widowed rancher, age 36, seeks sturdy wife for frontier life. Must be hard-working, honest, and capable of enduring harsh conditions. Beauty not required." The 3 sisters dissolved into giggles. "Beauty not required," Sarah repeated, clutching her sides. "Can you imagine? What kind of desperate woman would answer that?" "A homely one," Caroline supplied helpfully. "Someone absolutely hideous who couldn't catch a husband any other way." They looked at Eliza. The moment stretched out like taffy, sweet and poisonous. Eliza felt her face heat up, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd learned early that showing pain only made them push harder. "Well," she said quietly, "at least he's honest about what he wants." "Oh, Eliza." Margaret's smile widened. "You're so practical. That's what I've always admired about you." There was nothing admiring in her tone. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes bright with mischief. "You know what would be absolutely hilarious? If someone actually answered this poor man's advertisement. Can you imagine his face when he realizes what beauty not required actually gets him?" "We should send him a photograph," Caroline said suddenly. "Just for fun. See if he's truly desperate enough to accept just anyone. Whose photograph? Margaret asked. The three sisters looked at Eliza again. No, Eliza said immediately. Absolutely not. Oh, come on, Sarah cajoled. Where's your sense of humor? We're not actually sending you to Montana. We're just going to see if he responds. It's a joke, Eliza, a harmless little prank. It's not harmless to him, Eliza pointed out. He's looking for a real wife. And he'll get one, Margaret assured her. From someone else. Someone appropriate. We're just testing his sincerity. If he's really so desperate that he'd accept anyone, doesn't he deserve to know that? The logic was twisted, but her sisters had already decided. Caroline was rifling through the drawer where their mother kept family photographs. She emerged with a small tintype taken at the church social 2 years ago. Eliza standing stiffly beside the dessert table, her face solemn and plain, her dress shapeless and dark. Perfect, Caroline declared. Please don't, Eliza said. The words came out smaller than she intended. Sarah waved her concerns away. Don't be such a spoil sport. Nothing will come of it anyway. Men like him probably receive dozens of responses. He'll never even notice one plain girl from Kansas. They drafted the letter right there at the table, their heads together like conspirators. Eliza stood frozen, watching them reduce her to a fiction. Dear Sir, I am writing in response to your advertisement in the Western Matrimonial News. I am a simple woman of modest means and no remarkable beauty, but I am hard-working, honest, and capable of enduring whatever hardships frontier life might bring. I have managed household affairs since I was young and am accustomed to difficult conditions. If you find these qualities sufficient, I would be willing to discuss the possibility of marriage. Respectfully, Miss Eliza Whitmore, Millbrook, Kansas Territory. They included the photograph, sealed the envelope. Caroline ran it to the post office before supper, returning breathless and flushed with excitement. It's done, she announced. Now we wait. Eliza said nothing. She returned to her corner, to her cold water and dirty dishes, and tried to ignore the sick feeling in her stomach. Her mother learned about it that evening. Martha Whitmore was a tall, angular woman who'd been beautiful once, before 4 daughters and a disappointing husband wore her down to sharp edges and bitter practicality. She'd buried her husband 3 years ago without shedding a tear. He'd drunk himself to death slowly, leaving them with debts and a house that leaked when it rained. You did what? Martha's voice was flat, dangerous. Sarah, suddenly less confident, explained about the advertisement, the photograph, the letter already on its way to Montana. It was just a joke, Mother, she finished weakly. Martha looked at Eliza, who was setting the table for dinner. Did you agree to this? No, Eliza said, but you didn't stop them. Would it have mattered if I tried? The question hung in the air. Martha pressed her lips together, and for a moment Eliza thought she might actually defend her, but the moment passed. Well, Martha said finally, nothing will come of it anyway. Men on the frontier can't afford to be that desperate. But Martha was wrong. 3 weeks later, the response arrived. Eliza was in the garden when Caroline burst through the back door, waving an envelope like a flag. It came! Oh my stars, it actually came! The 4 of them crowded into the kitchen. Eliza still had dirt under her fingernails from planting, and watched Martha open the envelope with shaking hands. The letter was brief, businesslike, written in dark ink with a firm hand. Miss Whitmore, your letter reached me, and I appreciate your honesty. I'm not a man of pretty words, so I'll speak plainly. I need a wife who can survive Montana winters, help manage ranch operations, and won't break under pressure. Beauty fades. Character doesn't. If you're as capable as you claim, that's enough. I'm enclosing money for train fare. If you're serious about this arrangement, arrive in Clearwater Station by May 15th. I'll meet you there. If you're not serious, keep the money and forget this letter. But if you come, understand this. I expect honesty, hard work, and loyalty. In return, I'll provide protection, provision, and respect. I won't promise love, but I'll promise fairness. Caleb Mercer. Mercer Ranch. Clearwater, Montana Territory. $50 in bills fell out of the envelope onto the table. Nobody laughed. Sarah picked up the money with trembling fingers. $50, she whispered. That's 6 months' wages. He's serious, Margaret said, her face pale. Oh, Lord, he actually thinks Eliza's coming. Caroline looked like she might be sick. What do we do? We write back, Martha said immediately. We explain there's been a misunderstanding. We return the money. We apologize. She looked at Eliza, expecting agreement, but Eliza was staring at the letter, reading it again and again. Character doesn't fade. I'll promise fairness. 23 years she'd lived in this house. 23 years of being the ugly sister, the servant, the burden. 23 years of sleeping in the kitchen and eating from the pan and wearing her dead grandmother's dresses because new fabric was wasted on someone who'd never marry anyway. No, Eliza said. Everyone turned to stare. What did you say? Martha asked. I said no. Eliza's hands were shaking, but her voice held steady. I'm going to Montana. Don't be ridiculous, Sarah snapped. This was a joke, Eliza. You can't actually… Why not? Eliza looked at her eldest sister, this beautiful woman who'd never wanted for anything. You sent my photograph. You wrote a letter in my name. You told him I was willing to go, so I'm going. You'll die out there, Margaret said. Montana Territory is wilderness, mountains and snow and God knows what else. You've never been further than Millbrook in your entire life. Then I'll see something new before I die. The kitchen went silent. Caroline tried a different approach, her voice turning sweet and wheedling. Eliza, sweetheart, we didn't mean any harm. We were just playing. But this man, Caleb Mercer, he sounds dangerous, rough. Do you really want to marry a stranger, as opposed to staying here? Eliza looked around the kitchen, at the walls she'd scrubbed 1,000 times, at the stove she'd cooked on until she could tell its temperature by sound, at the corner where her cot sat like a reminder of her status. What exactly am I staying for? Martha's voice turned cold. You're staying because you're my daughter, and I forbid this. I'm 23 years old, Eliza said, old enough to make my own decisions. With what money? You have nothing. No clothes suitable for travel, no luggage. No, I have $50. Eliza picked up the bills from the table. More money than I've ever held in my life. Money he sent for me because he thinks I'm worth bringing to Montana. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and she hated herself for it. Sarah reached out, her expression softening. Eliza, please, think about this. You don't know this man. You don't know anything about him except one letter. He could be a drunk, a brute. He could work you to death or worse. Or, Eliza said quietly, he could keep his promises. Honesty, hard work, loyalty, fairness. That's more than I've gotten here. The words landed like stones. Martha's face flushed red. How dare you? After everything you've what, Mother? Eliza's voice rose, surprising even herself. Fed me? Given me a corner to sleep in? Let me work like a mule while my sisters prepared for real lives? You want gratitude for that? You ungrateful little… I'm grateful, Eliza interrupted. Her hands had stopped shaking. I'm grateful for the lesson. I've learned exactly how much I'm worth to this family. Now I'm going to find out what I'm worth to someone else. She turned and walked upstairs before anyone could respond. Her belongings fit into a single canvas bag. 3 dresses, all worn, undergarments, a hairbrush with missing bristles. The Bible her father had given her before he started drinking. She hesitated over that, then left it on the cot. She took her mother's sewing kit instead. At least that would be useful. She changed into her best dress, a dark blue wool that was only slightly faded, and pinned up her hair. In the small mirror above the washstand, her reflection looked back at her. Plain features, serious eyes, a mouth that had forgotten how to smile. She tried smiling anyway. It felt strange. Downstairs, her family had gathered in the front room. The atmosphere had shifted from shock to something darker. Sarah stood with her arms crossed, her beautiful face set in disapproving lines. Margaret perched on the settee, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Caroline slumped in the corner chair, refusing to look up. Martha stood by the fireplace like a general preparing for battle. If you do this, her mother said, you're making a mistake you can't take back. I know, Eliza said. He'll send you home within a month, maybe sooner. Then I'll come home, Eliza kept her voice level. And you can all say you told me so. We won't take you back, Sarah said suddenly. If you leave like this, humiliating us, making us look like fools, don't expect to return to this house. Eliza looked at her sister, this woman who'd never known a moment of invisibility in her life. Good, she said. She walked out the front door with her canvas bag and the $50 Caleb Mercer had sent for her. The train station in Millbrook was barely more than a platform and a shelter. The ticket agent, a dried-up man named Henderson who'd sold her father his whiskey, looked at her with open surprise when she requested passage to Montana Territory. "That's a long journey for a young woman traveling alone," he said. His eyes dropped to her ring finger. "You got family out there?" "I'm getting married," Eliza said. The words felt foreign in her mouth. Henderson's surprise deepened. "Well, congratulations." He counted out her change. "You'll need to transfer in Denver, then Cheyenne. Then you catch the Montana line north. Total journey's about 4 days if the connections run smooth." 4 days. Eliza clutched her ticket and tried not to think about how far that was. How final. The westbound train arrived 2 hours later, belching smoke and shrieking like a wounded animal. Eliza climbed aboard with her bag and found a seat by the window. The car was half empty. A few men in work clothes, a woman with 2 small children, a salesman type reading a newspaper. Nobody looked at her twice. The train lurched forward. Through the window, Eliza watched Millbrook slide away. The church steeple, the general store, the houses where she'd lived her entire invisible life. She waited to feel regret, fear, something. Instead, she felt light. The landscape changed as they traveled west. The flat Kansas plains gave way to rolling hills. The hills became bluffs. The sky seemed bigger somehow, less pressed down by familiarity. Eliza pressed her face to the window and watched America scroll past like pages in a book she'd never been allowed to read. In Denver, she transferred to a northbound line. The elevation climbed. The air thinned and cooled. She'd brought bread and cheese from home, eating sparingly because she didn't know what food would cost out here. At night she dozed, sitting up, her bag clutched to her chest, dreaming of mountains she'd never seen. By the 4th day, exhaustion had worn through her initial resolve. Her back ached from the hard seats. Her dress smelled like coal smoke and sweat. She'd run out of food and spent precious cents on an apple that tasted like nothing. But when the conductor called out Clearwater Station, her heart hammered so hard she thought she might be sick. The platform was rough wood, a few buildings scattered nearby, a hotel, a general store, a saloon with music bleeding through its walls. Mountains loomed in every direction, their peaks still white with snow despite it being mid-May. Eliza stepped off the train with her bag, and the cold hit her like a fist. Kansas had been warming into spring. Montana was still locked in winter's grip. She stood on the platform, shivering, scanning the handful of people waiting there. 2 women in fine traveling clothes being greeted by a man in a suit. A group of cowboys loading supplies onto a wagon. An old prospector type sleeping against the station wall. And then she saw him. He stood apart from the others, one shoulder propped against a post, his hat pulled low. Tall, broad-shouldered. Weather-worn in a way that said this land had tested him and he'd survived. He wore work clothes, canvas pants, a wool coat, boots scarred from hard use. A gun belt sat low on his hips, worn with the casual familiarity of someone who'd needed it more than once. He was watching her. Eliza picked up her bag and walked toward him, her legs shaking from more than just the train journey. When she got close enough, she stopped, looked up. His face was hard-angled and sun-darkened, lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. Somewhere in his 30s, though he carried himself older, his eyes were gray, the color of winter storms. Those eyes traveled over her slowly, taking inventory. She saw him note her plain face, her worn dress, her work-roughened hands. Saw him compare her to whatever he'd expected. She waited for the disappointment. Instead, he nodded once. "You came," Caleb Mercer said. His voice was rough, like gravel scraped over stone. "I came," Eliza agreed. "That your only bag?" "Yes." Another nod. "Good. The ranch is 2 hours north. We'll stop in town for supplies first. You need anything?" "No." He looked at her harder then. "When's the last time you ate?" She hesitated. "Yesterday." Something flickered across his face. Annoyance, maybe, or concern. "We'll get food." He turned and started walking. Eliza followed, her bag heavy in her hand. The wagon was loaded with supplies already. Sacks of flour and beans, coils of rope, tools she couldn't name. Caleb took her bag and tossed it onto the pile without ceremony, then held out a hand to help her up. His palm was calloused, warm despite the cold air. She climbed onto the bench seat, and he settled beside her, taking up the reins. They drove into Clearwater in silence. The town was small, maybe 200 people, but it had a rawness to it that Millbrook lacked. Everything looked newer, rougher, like it had been carved out of the wilderness through sheer stubbornness. Men walked the streets armed. Women watched from doorways with assessing eyes. Caleb stopped the wagon outside a restaurant that was barely more than a shack. Inside, the air was warm and smelled like frying meat. He ordered steak and potatoes for both of them without asking what she wanted. When the food came, more food than she'd normally eat in 2 days, he nodded at her plate. "Eat." Eliza cut into the steak. It was tough and oversalted, but it was hot and real, and she'd been living on bread and cheese for 4 days. She ate methodically, aware of him watching her. "You're thinner than your picture," he said finally. She looked up. "Is that a problem?" "Depends. Are you sickly?" "No. Then it's not a problem." He pushed his potatoes toward her. "Finish these. You'll need your strength." She wanted to refuse, pride or stubbornness or some ingrained need not to take more than she'd earned, but hunger won. She ate his potatoes too. When they left the restaurant, the sun had dropped lower, casting long shadows across the mountains. Caleb loaded a few more supplies, bolts of sturdy fabric, coffee, a box of ammunition, and then they headed north. The road climbed into foothills. Trees closed in on both sides, pine and spruce, dark and dense. The temperature dropped further. Eliza pulled her thin shawl tighter and tried not to shiver. Caleb noticed. Without a word, he reached behind the seat and pulled out a heavy coat, wool lined with fleece. He dropped it in her lap. "It was my wife's," he said. "She won't need it anymore." Eliza's hand stilled on the coat. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. She's been gone 3 years." He didn't elaborate. Eliza put on the coat. It smelled like cedar and something else, maybe memory. It was far too big, but it was warm, and she stopped shaking. The ranch appeared as the sun touched the mountain peaks. Eliza had expected something rough, perhaps just a cabin and a barn. Instead, she saw a compound, a main house built of logs with a stone chimney, several outbuildings, corrals holding horses and cattle, and in the distance what looked like bunkhouses. This wasn't a homestead, this was an operation. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop outside the main house. Smoke rose from the chimney, lamplight showed in the windows. He jumped down and came around to help her, and this time when his hand closed around hers, she noticed the strength in it, not brutality, but capability. "Come on," he said, "I'll show you the house." The front door opened before they reached it. A boy stood in the doorway, maybe 7 years old with dark hair and his father's serious eyes. He looked at Eliza without smiling, without expression, like he'd already learned not to expect anything good. "This is my son," Caleb said. "Thomas." The boy continued staring. "Thomas?" Caleb's voice sharpened slightly. "Say hello." "Hello," Thomas said flatly. Eliza crouched down, bringing herself to the boy's eye level. His clothes were clean but worn. His hair needed cutting. His face had the solemn, closed-off look of a child who'd grown up too fast. She knew that look. She'd seen it in mirrors. "Hello, Thomas," she said quietly. "I'm Eliza." The boy studied her with unsettling intensity. "You're not pretty," he said finally. Behind her, Caleb sucked in a sharp breath. "Thomas." "No," Eliza interrupted. She kept her eyes on the boy. "You're right, I'm not. But I can cook, and I can mend clothes, and I know how to read. Can you read, Thomas?" The boy's expression shifted slightly, surprise maybe. "Some. Then maybe I can help you practice, if you want." Thomas looked at his father, then back at Eliza. He stepped aside from the doorway without answering. Eliza rose and followed Caleb inside. The house was bigger than it looked from outside. A large main room with a fireplace dominated the space, furnished with rough-made furniture that was sturdy rather than beautiful. A kitchen area occupied one corner. Doors led to what she assumed were bedrooms. It was clean, painfully clean, like someone had scrubbed away every trace of the woman who'd lived here before. "Your room's there," Caleb pointed to a door on the left. "Mine's the other side. Thomas sleeps upstairs in the loft. Privy's out back. Well's on the east side of the house. Breakfast is at 5. We'll need to discuss work schedules and—" "Caleb," Eliza interrupted. He stopped, looking at her. Is there a minister in town? She asked. His jaw tightened. Yes. Then we should go see him. Now? Tomorrow, she said. I came here to marry you, not to be your cook and housekeeper. Something flickered in those gray eyes. Respect, maybe. Or surprise that she'd demand what he'd offered. Tomorrow, then, he agreed. He showed her to the bedroom, small, functional, with a bed frame and a chest of drawers and nothing else. He set her bag on the bed. Dinner's in an hour, he said. If you need anything, I'll manage, Eliza said. He nodded and left, closing the door behind him. Eliza stood in the center of the room, listening to the sounds of this strange house settling around her. Footsteps overhead, Thomas moving in the loft. Caleb's heavier tread in the main room, wind hitting the windows, fire crackling in the hearth. She sat down on the bed. It was soft, or maybe she was just tired, and let herself feel the weight of what she'd done. 4 days ago, she'd been scrubbing chamber pots in Kansas. Now she was in Montana territory, about to marry a stranger. She waited for fear, for regret. Instead, she felt that same strange lightness she'd experienced leaving Millbrook, like she'd dropped a burden so heavy she'd stopped noticing it was there. Eliza unpacked her few belongings, hanging her dresses in the small closet, setting her brush on the dresser. Then she washed her face in the basin, pinned up her hair properly, and went to meet her new life. The kitchen revealed itself more fully in lamplight. Cast iron pots hung from hooks. Supplies lined the shelves with military precision: flour, beans, coffee, sugar, salt, a bread box, a butter crock. Everything labeled and organized. Caleb and Thomas sat at the table, not speaking. A pot simmered on the stove. Stew, Caleb said when he saw her looking. One of the hands made it earlier. Eliza ladled 3 bowls, set them on the table with bread and butter, and sat down. They ate in silence. The stew was decent, meat and vegetables and enough salt. The bread was dense and dark, probably rye. Thomas ate with single-minded focus, head down, not looking at anyone. When he finished, he stood, carried his bowl to the wash basin, and disappeared up the stairs to the loft without a word. He doesn't talk much, Caleb said into the silence. Hasn't since his mother died. Eliza wiped her mouth with a napkin. What happened? Childbirth. His voice was flat. The baby came early, wrong position. The doctor couldn't... He stopped, started again. She bled to death while I watched. The baby lived maybe an hour. Eliza absorbed this. I'm sorry. You said that already. I mean it. He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw something raw and exhausted in his face. Why did you come? Because you asked. That's not an answer. Eliza set down her fork. Outside, the wind had picked up, making the house creak and settle. My sister sent that letter as a joke. They photographed me to humiliate you and humiliate me because that's what they do. They wanted you to reject me so they could laugh about it. Caleb's eyes narrowed. But you came anyway. I came because you didn't reject me. She met his gaze steadily. You read a letter that called me plain and capable, saw a photograph of a girl nobody ever looked at twice, and you sent money. You treated me like I was worth something. So yes, I came. The silence stretched out. I can't promise to love you, Caleb said finally. I know, you said that in your letter. I had a wife I loved. She's gone. There's nothing left of that in me. Eliza nodded. That's fair, but I'll keep my other promises. Protection, provision, respect. If you work hard and stay honest, you'll have a place here. That's all I'm asking for. He studied her for a long moment, and she wondered what he saw. Not beauty, they'd both established that. Maybe he saw what she'd seen in Thomas's face, that look of someone who'd survived something and didn't expect softness anymore. We'll go to town tomorrow, Caleb said. See the minister, make this legal. All right. After that, you'll need to learn how this ranch operates. It's not like running a house in Kansas. The work's harder. The winters are brutal. You'll be expected to help beyond just cooking and cleaning. Good, Eliza said. His eyebrows rose slightly. I didn't come here to be comfortable, she explained. I came here to be useful. Something almost like approval crossed his face. He stood collecting the dishes. Eliza started to rise, but he waved her back. You traveled 4 days on a train, he said. Rest tonight. Work starts tomorrow. He carried the dishes to the basin and began washing them, rough, efficient movements that said he'd been doing this himself for a long time. Eliza watched him, this man who'd sent $50 to a stranger because she'd promised to be honest and capable. Caleb, she said. He glanced back. Thank you. He frowned. For what? For answering the letter. He turned back to the dishes. Thank me when you've survived a Montana winter. But there was something in his voice, not quite warmth, but not cold either. Like maybe, possibly, this arrangement might work. Eliza went to bed that night in a room that smelled like cedar and old memories, listening to the wind test the walls and the house settle around her. She thought about her sisters in Kansas, probably already spreading the story of how poor, foolish Eliza ran off to marry a stranger. She thought about her mother's disappointed face, about Millbrook and its dying dreams, and she thought about tomorrow, marrying a man she didn't love, who didn't love her. And somehow, that felt more honest than anything she'd left behind. She fell asleep before fear could find her. Outside, the Montana mountains stood guard under cold stars, waiting to see if this plain girl from Kansas had enough steel in her spine to survive what was coming. Because winter was only the beginning. The wedding took place in a cramped office that smelled like tobacco and old paper. The minister was a thin man named Reverend Blackwood, who looked like he'd been carved from driftwood and left to dry in the sun. He asked no questions when Caleb showed up with a woman he'd never seen before, just opened his book and began reading the words that would bind them legally. Eliza wore her blue dress. Caleb had shaved. Those were the only concessions they made to ceremony. Do you, Caleb James Mercer, take this woman? I do, Caleb interrupted. Reverend Blackwood blinked, then turned to Eliza. And do you? I do, she said. The minister looked between them like he wanted to say something about patience and the sanctity of vows, but apparently he'd been in Montana long enough to recognize when people weren't interested in speeches. He pronounced them married, had them sign the register, and accepted the $5 Caleb handed him. They walked out into morning sunlight as husband and wife. That's done then, Caleb said. Yes, Eliza agreed. They stood on the wooden sidewalk while the town moved around them. A freight wagon rumbled past. Two women in fine dresses paused across the street, staring at Eliza with open curiosity. One of them leaned close to whisper something that made the other smile. Eliza had seen that smile before. In Kansas. In every town and church, social, and gathering she'd ever attended. The smile that said, "Look at that poor thing." "We need supplies," Caleb said, apparently oblivious. "Then we'll head back." The general store was packed with everything from harnesses to hard candy. The proprietor, a round man with mutton chops and suspicious eyes, nodded at Caleb. "Morning, Mercer. Heard you got hitched." "News travels," Caleb said flatly. "It does." The man's eyes slid to Eliza. "This the bride?" "My wife, Eliza." The proprietor looked her up and down with the assessing gaze of someone evaluating livestock. "Well, welcome to Clearwater, Mrs. Mercer." There was no warmth in it. Caleb rattled off a list of supplies: nails, kerosene, salt, coffee, sugar, flour. The proprietor filled the order while two other customers pretended not to watch. One was a heavy-set woman in a dress that cost more than anything Eliza had ever worn. The other was younger, maybe 25, beautiful in the particular way that made men stupid. She had blonde hair pinned up in elaborate curls and a mouth painted red. The beautiful woman approached while Caleb was inspecting a new axe handle. "You're the mail-order bride," she said to Eliza. Not a question. "I'm Eliza Mercer," Eliza replied. "I'm Clara Beaumont." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "My father owns the hotel and half the buildings on Main Street. I've known Caleb since he came to Montana." Eliza waited. There was clearly more coming. "His first wife was beautiful," Clara continued. "Catherine. Everyone loved her. She was elegant and refined and everything a rancher's wife should be." She tilted her head. "I suppose you'll have large shoes to fill." "I suppose I'll buy my own shoes," Eliza said. Clara's smile tightened. "How practical." "Well, I'm sure you'll do your best." She glanced toward Caleb. It must be difficult for him, settling for someone so different from Catherine. The words were designed to cut, and they did. But Eliza had been cut by experts. Her sisters could have taught classes. "If you'll excuse me," Eliza said. "My husband is waiting." She turned away before Clara could respond. Caleb had finished with the axe handle and was settling the account. They loaded the supplies into the wagon in silence and drove out of town with a dozen eyes watching from windows and doorways. "That woman at the store," Eliza said once they'd cleared the last building. "Clara Beaumont. What about her?" "She wanted to marry you." Caleb's jaw tightened. "That's her business." "Did you want to marry her?" "If I did, I would have." He didn't elaborate. Eliza let it drop, but she filed the information away, this knowledge that she'd taken something Clara Beaumont wanted, and that Clara wasn't the type to forgive that. The ranch looked different in full daylight. Eliza could see the scope of it now, hundreds of acres spreading out toward the mountains, divided by wooden fences. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, horses moved in the corrals. 3 men worked near one of the barns, their voices carrying on the wind. "Those are some of the hands," Caleb said, following her gaze. "We've got 8 men year-round, more during calving and roundup. They live in the bunkhouse. They'll take their meals there too, so you won't have to feed them." "All right, but you'll need to understand how the operation runs, the supply schedules, the grazing rotations, when the cattle move to summer range, how we manage the winter stores." He pulled the wagon to a stop outside the main house. "This ranch survives because everything is planned. Nothing is wasted. Everyone pulls their weight." "I understand." "Do you?" He looked at her directly. "Because this isn't a house in Kansas. You can't just cook and clean and call it done. I need a partner who understands this land and what it takes to survive it." Eliza met his gaze. "Then teach me." Something shifted in his expression. "Starting now?" "Why wait?" He almost smiled. Almost. "Fine. Help me unload these supplies, then I'll show you the operation." They worked together in silence, carrying sacks and crates into the house. Eliza's arms burned from the weight. Those sacks of flour were 50 pounds each, but she didn't complain. When they finished, Caleb took her on a tour of the ranch that felt more like a military briefing. The main barn housed equipment, tack, and winter feed. The smaller barn was for calving. The smokehouse held preserved meat. The root cellar contained vegetables that wouldn't last another month. The chicken coop needed cleaning but produced 24 eggs daily. The well never ran dry, even in August. The privy was downwind for a reason. "We've got about 300 head of cattle right now," Caleb explained as they walked. "We'll sell half in the fall, keep the rest through winter. The ones we keep need hay, about 20 pounds per head per day from November through April. That's over 90,000 pounds of hay per winter." Eliza did the math in her head. "That's 45 tons. He looked surprised. "You're good with numbers." "I managed my family's household accounts for 8 years. "Good. You'll manage the ranch books then." He pointed toward the mountains. "Summer range is up there. We move the herd in June, bring them down in September. Winter range is the lower pastures. During calving season, February through April, we're checking the herd every 4 hours, day and night." "Every 4 hours," Eliza repeated. "Every 4 hours. If a cow's having trouble, you've got maybe 30 minutes to help before you lose both of them." They reached the corrals where the 3 ranch hands were working. They stopped when they saw Caleb approaching, their faces careful and neutral. "Boys," Caleb said, "this is my wife, Eliza. She'll be learning the operation, so answer her questions straight." The 3 men nodded. The oldest was maybe 50, weathered and lean with a gray beard. The other 2 were younger, one Mexican with a scar across his cheek, the other pale and freckled with nervous energy. "Ma'am," the old one said. His eyes traveled over her once, assessing. "I'm Frank. That's Miguel and Danny." "Pleased to meet you," Eliza said. Frank's expression didn't change. "You ever worked cattle before?" "No." "Horses?" "No." "You know anything about ranch work at all?" "Not yet." Frank looked at Caleb. "She always this honest?" "Seems to be," Caleb said. "Well," Frank spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "At least she ain't pretending. That's something." It wasn't exactly a warm welcome, but it wasn't hostile either. Eliza took it. They spent the rest of the morning touring the property. Caleb pointed out fence lines that needed repair, water sources that required monitoring, areas where predators, wolves and mountain lions, had been spotted. He explained weather patterns, grazing cycles, market prices. He talked about the ranch like it was a living thing that required constant attention and understanding. By the time they returned to the house, Eliza's feet ached and her head spun with information. But she'd taken mental notes on everything, filing it away with the same systematic precision she'd used managing her mother's household. Thomas was sitting on the porch steps, scratching something in the dirt with a stick. He looked up when they approached, his small face unreadable. "You hungry?" Eliza asked him. The boy shrugged. "I'll take that as yes." She headed inside, hearing Caleb murmur something to his son before following her in. The kitchen was clean, too clean, like Caleb had scrubbed it aggressively after Catherine died and never stopped. Eliza found dried beans soaking in a pot, salt pork in the cold box, onions and potatoes in the cellar. She got to work. Cooking in this kitchen was different from Kansas. The stove burned hotter. The altitude made water boil strangely. The ingredients were simpler, rougher, but the fundamentals were the same, and Eliza had been cooking since she was tall enough to reach a counter. She made bean soup with salt pork, cornbread with the last of the buttermilk, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. When she called them to dinner, Caleb and Thomas appeared promptly, taking their usual seats. They ate in silence for a few minutes, then Thomas spoke. "This is good." It was the first complete sentence he'd offered since she'd arrived. "Thank you," Eliza said. "Better than Father's cooking." "Thomas," Caleb warned. "It's true," the boy insisted. "Your beans are always mushy." "That's because I have a ranch to run," Caleb said. "I can't spend all day watching a pot." "I didn't spend all day," Eliza said. "The beans were already soaking. I just added the pork and let them simmer." Thomas looked at his father with something approaching triumph. "See?" Caleb's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Eat your cornbread." After dinner, Thomas disappeared upstairs to the loft. Eliza washed dishes while Caleb sat at the table reviewing papers. Accounts or contracts she couldn't tell. The domesticity of it felt strange, foreign, like she was playing house in someone else's life. "Tomorrow you'll start helping with the chickens," Caleb said without looking up. "Then the garden. It needs planting, and we're already behind. All right. Day after that, Frank will teach you about the cattle, basic care, how to spot trouble, what to do during calving." "I thought calving season was over." He glanced up and there was approval in his eyes. "It is, but you'll need to know for next year." He hesitated. "If you're still here next year." Eliza dried the last dish and put it away. "Where else would I be?" "Back in Kansas." "No," she said. "I won't be going back." "You sound certain." "I am." He studied her for a long moment. "Why?" Eliza considered the question. Outside, the wind had picked up again, making the walls creak. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. "Because this place doesn't lie to me," she said finally. "It's hard and cold, and it doesn't care if I'm pretty or plain. It only cares if I'm strong enough. That's honest." Caleb set down his pen. "This place will try to kill you." "Probably." "You could die out here, from weather, from animals, from 100 different accidents. Montana doesn't care about fairness." "Neither did Kansas," Eliza said. "At least here, I'll die doing something that matters." The silence stretched out between them, heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. "You're strange," Caleb said finally. "Yes," Eliza agreed. "I've been told." He almost smiled again. Then he returned to his papers, and Eliza went to her room, and the house settled into the quiet rhythms of evening. The days developed a pattern. Eliza woke before dawn, started the fire, made coffee and breakfast. She fed the chickens, collected eggs, worked in the garden, planting potatoes and carrots and beans. She learned to milk the cow, an evil-tempered beast named Rosie, who kicked like she had a personal vendetta. She mended clothes, baked bread, scrubbed floors, and between all of that, she learned the ranch. Frank took her education seriously, teaching her with the same blunt efficiency he probably used on green ranch hands. He showed her how to approach cattle without spooking them, how to check their health, what signs indicated sickness or injury. He explained herd dynamics, the pecking order, why you never turned your back on a bull. "You're small," he said one afternoon while they were checking fence lines. "That's a problem." "I can't change my size," Eliza pointed out. "No, but you can be smarter. Cattle respond to confidence. You act scared, they'll run over you. You act like you belong there, they'll mostly leave you alone. He demonstrated by walking straight up to a massive steer that had to weigh over 1,000 pounds. The animal regarded him with mild interest, then went back to grazing. See? Confidence. Eliza tried it. The steer snorted and took 2 steps toward her. More confidence, Frank called. She straightened her spine and walked forward without hesitating. The steer watched her approach, decided she wasn't interesting, and moved away. Better? Frank allowed. You'll get there. Miguel taught her about horses. He was gentler than Frank, patient in a way that suggested he'd taught children before. He showed her how to approach them, how to read their body language, how to curry and bridle and saddle. The first time she climbed onto a horse, a gentle mare named Daisy, her legs shook so badly she thought she might fall off. Relax, Miguel said. She knows you're nervous. Breathe. Eliza forced herself to breathe. The horse shifted beneath her, warm and alive and terrifying. But slowly, carefully, she adjusted to the movement, finding the rhythm. Good, Miguel said. Now we walk. Danny was harder to read. He watched her with suspicious eyes, especially after Clara Beaumont visited the ranch one afternoon on some pretense about borrowing sugar. Clara ignored Eliza completely, chatting with Danny like they were old friends, laughing at things that weren't funny while shooting glances toward the house where Caleb was working. After she left, Danny barely spoke to Eliza for 3 days. He was sweet on Clara, Frank explained quietly. Half the county is. She's got her sights set on your husband, though, and always has. She can have him, Eliza said before she could stop herself. Frank raised his eyebrows. That's so. Eliza busied herself with the chicken feed. It's a practical arrangement, that's all. If you say so. But Frank's expression suggested he didn't believe her. The truth was more complicated than Eliza wanted to admit. She'd been at the ranch 3 weeks now, and Caleb remained exactly what he'd promised to be. Fair, respectful, distant. He never touched her beyond helping her up into the wagon or handing her tools. At night, he disappeared into his bedroom and closed the door, and Eliza did the same. They lived like polite strangers who happened to share a house. She told herself this was fine, expected, what she'd agreed to. But sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't read. And sometimes, when their hands brushed reaching for the same dish, something electric sparked between them that had nothing to do with practical arrangements. She tried not to think about it. Thomas was easier than his father. The boy had begun speaking more, mostly short comments about the food or questions about Kansas. He still didn't smile, but the rigid guardedness had loosened slightly. One evening, Eliza found him struggling with a book, some adventure story about pirates, and sat down to help him sound out the difficult words. Mother used to read to me, Thomas said quietly. Did she? Every night. She did all the voices different, made the pirates sound scary. He stared at the page. I can't remember what her voice sounded like anymore. Eliza's chest tightened. That happens sometimes. Memory fades. Does it make me bad? That I can't remember? No, Eliza said firmly. It makes you human. Thomas looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment she saw past the careful walls he'd built. He was just a little boy who'd watched his mother die and didn't know how to be a child anymore. Want me to read the rest? She asked. He nodded. She read 3 chapters in her plain, unmusical voice, not attempting pirate accents because she'd never been good at pretending. But Thomas listened intently, and when she finally closed the book, he said, Thank you. You're welcome. Will you read again tomorrow? If you want. I want. He went upstairs to bed after that, and Eliza sat in the quiet kitchen feeling like she'd accomplished something important, even if she couldn't quite name what. The town remained hostile. On her second trip to Clearwater, Caleb needed her to pick up supplies while he dealt with a contract issue. The women in the general store went silent when she entered. They didn't leave. They just stopped talking and stared. Clara was there again, of course. She seemed to materialize whenever Eliza appeared. Mrs. Mercer, Clara said with false sweetness. How are you settling in? Fine, thank you. Really, I'm surprised. Ranch life is so demanding, and you're so... She gestured vaguely. Delicate. Eliza was many things. Delicate was not one of them. I manage. I'm sure you try your best. Clara picked up a bolt of expensive fabric, examining it with exaggerated interest. You know, Catherine used to come to town every week. She was so social, always hosting dinners, organizing church events. She made the ranch feel like a real home. The other women nodded in agreement, a chorus of approval for the dead wife. Of course you're different, Clara continued. More practical. I suppose Caleb needs that now. Someone to cook and clean. Not everyone can be a true lady. The shopkeeper, the same man with mutton chops, cleared his throat uncomfortably. Even he seemed to recognize that Clara had crossed some line. But Eliza had spent 23 years being the ugly sister. She knew exactly what Clara was doing because her own sisters had perfected the technique. These small cuts, delivered with a smile, designed to make you feel small while giving the appearance of kindness. You're right, Eliza said calmly. I'm not a true lady. I'm a rancher's wife. Those are different things. She collected her supplies, paid, and walked out with her head up while Clara's friends whispered behind their hands. The ride back to the ranch was long enough for anger to seep in. Not at Clara. People like Clara would always exist, but at the unfairness of it. She'd come to Montana expecting nothing, asking for nothing except a chance to be useful. And still, somehow, she'd failed to measure up to a ghost. Catherine. Beautiful, elegant, beloved Catherine, who died in childbirth and left behind a shrine that Eliza could never match. She was in a foul mood when she arrived home. Caleb was in the barn repairing tack, and she unloaded the supplies with more force than necessary, slamming sacks down harder than needed. Something wrong? Caleb appeared in the doorway. No. You're terrible at lying. Fine. She turned to face him. Tell me about Catherine. His expression shuddered immediately. Why? Because everyone in town talks about her like she was some kind of saint, and I'm living in her house, sleeping in her room, trying to raise her son, so tell me about her. Caleb's jaw tightened. Catherine was my wife. She's dead. That's all you need to know. That's not all I need to know, Eliza shot back. That's all you want to tell me. There's a difference. They stared at each other across the wagon bed, tension crackling between them. Catherine was beautiful, Caleb said finally, his voice hard. Social, charming. She could walk into a room and make everyone love her within 5 minutes. She organized dinner parties and church socials. She knew everyone's name, remembered everyone's children. She made this ranch feel like civilization instead of wilderness. And, Eliza pressed, and she hated it here. The words came out harsh. She smiled and played hostess and pretended everything was fine, but she hated every minute of Montana. The cold, the isolation, the dirt. She wanted to go back east, live in a city, be somewhere people cared about fashion and society instead of survival. His hands clenched. She got pregnant thinking it would make her feel differently. It didn't. She was miserable right up until the birth killed her. Eliza absorbed this. I'm sorry. Don't be. It wasn't your fault. He turned away. But don't ask me to compare you to her. You're nothing alike. And that's probably better for everyone. He walked into the barn, leaving Eliza standing in the yard with a wagon half unloaded and a dozen new questions she didn't know how to ask. That night, Thomas asked her to read again. They were on Chapter 7 of the Pirate Book when Caleb came in from checking the stock. He stood in the doorway listening, his expression unreadable. When she finished, Thomas went to bed, and Caleb poured himself coffee that had to be hours old and bitter as hell. He's talking more, Caleb said. Yes. You're good with him. I try. Silence. Then, Catherine wasn't good with him. She loved him, but she didn't know how to. She got frustrated when he cried or didn't sleep. She wanted him to be easier than he was. Eliza didn't know what to say to that. I'm not good at this, Caleb continued, staring into his coffee. Talking, explaining things. Catherine used to complain about it. She'd want to discuss feelings and future plans, and I'd just want to work. I don't need discussions about feelings, Eliza said. No? No. I need to know what you expect from me so I can do it right. He looked at her then, and something in his expression shifted. I expect you to survive, that's all. Just survive Montana and don't break. I won't break, Eliza said. Catherine did. I'm not Catherine. No, he agreed. You're not. He finished his coffee and went to his room, and Eliza sat in the kitchen long after the lamps burned low, thinking about beauty and survival and which one actually mattered when the snow came. Because everyone kept warning her about winter. Frank mentioned it. Miguel mentioned it. Even Danny, in his few words, had muttered something about hoping she made it through December. Like winter was a test she had to pass before anyone would take her seriously. Fine, Eliza thought. Let winter come. She'd survived 23 years of being invisible. Surely she could survive a few months of snow. Summer arrived like a promise Montana had no intention of keeping. The days stretched longer, warm enough that Eliza could work outside without her coat, but the night still dropped cold enough to see her breath. Frank said this was normal. Everything in Montana existed in extremes. You get 3 months of decent weather, he told her while they repaired fence line in the north pasture. Maybe 4 if you're lucky. Rest of the year you're either preparing for winter, surviving winter, or recovering from winter. Sounds miserable, Eliza said, pulling wire tight while Frank secured it. It is. He hammered in another staple. That's why most people don't last. They come out here thinking they're tough enough, and Montana proves them wrong. But you stayed. I'm too stubborn to leave, and too old to start over somewhere else. He straightened, pressing a hand to his lower back. You, though, you're young enough to have options. You could go back to Kansas, find some nice town boy, have an easy life. Eliza tested the fence wire. Solid. I don't want an easy life. Yeah, I'm starting to figure that out. Frank grabbed his tools and headed toward the next section that needed work. You're either crazy or you've got something to prove. Haven't decided which. Maybe both, Eliza said. He laughed at that, a rough bark of sound. Maybe both. The herd moved to summer range in mid-June. Eliza watched from the porch as Caleb and the hands drove 300 head of cattle up into the mountains, their voices echoing across the valley as they pushed the animals through the gates and onto the narrow trails. It took 2 full days to get them settled, and when Caleb finally returned, he looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. They're up, he said, dropping into a chair at the kitchen table. Lost 1 calf to a cougar, but that's expected. Eliza set food in front of him, venison stew, the last of the winter stores finally used up. The garden's producing now. We'll have fresh vegetables soon. Good. He ate mechanically, barely tasting. I need to ride up every few days to check them, make sure they're not wandering into trouble. Can I come? He looked up, surprised. It's a hard ride. 8 hours up, 8 back. I can ride now. Miguel's been teaching me. Miguel's been teaching you on flat ground. Mountain trails are different. 1 wrong step and your horse goes over the edge with you on it. Then teach me how to do it right, Eliza said. You said you needed a partner who understands the operation. The cattle are the operation. Caleb studied her, his gray eyes assessing. You're serious. I'm always serious. Something almost like respect crossed his face. Fine, we'll go next week. But if I tell you to do something, you do it immediately. No questions. Hesitation gets you killed in the mountains. Understood. They went the following Tuesday. Eliza woke before dawn to find Caleb already up, packing supplies into saddlebags. He'd laid out extra clothes for her, canvas pants that had belonged to Catherine, a heavy wool shirt, a coat that was worn but warm. Put these on, he said. Dresses don't work in the mountains. Eliza changed in her room, feeling strange in pants for the first time in her life. They were too long. Catherine had been taller, so she rolled them up. When she emerged, Thomas was sitting at the table eating breakfast, his eyes going wide. You look like a boy, he said. I look like someone who's not going to freeze to death, Eliza corrected. Caleb handed her a rifle. You know how to shoot? No. Then let's hope you don't need to. He showed her how to carry it safely across her back. But if something comes at you, bear, cougar, wolf, you point and pull the trigger. Don't think, just shoot. What are the odds of that happening? Low. But this is Montana. Low odds still happen. They rode out as the sun broke over the eastern peaks. Daisy, the gentle mare Miguel had taught her on, was left behind. Instead, Caleb put her on a rangy gelding named Buck, who had the kind of calm temperament that suggested he'd seen everything and couldn't be bothered to panic. Buck's done this trail 100 times, Caleb said. Trust him. If the path looks dangerous, he knows how to handle it. The first hour was easy, following creek beds and open meadows. Then the trail started climbing. The trees closed in, pine and fir, so dense they blocked most of the sunlight. The air grew thinner. Eliza's lungs burned from the altitude, and her thighs ached from gripping the saddle. Caleb rode ahead, his posture easy and relaxed despite the treacherous terrain. He'd point out things as they went, where to watch for loose rock, which plants the cattle would eat, signs of predator activity. He didn't slow down or ask if she needed rest. This wasn't a leisurely ride. This was work. They stopped once to water the horses at a stream that ran so clear Eliza could see every stone on the bottom. She drank from her canteen while Caleb checked the map he carried in his head, his eyes scanning the mountains like he was reading a familiar book. "We're about halfway," he said. "The hard part comes next." The hard part was a switchback trail that clung to the side of a cliff with a drop that went down forever. Eliza made the mistake of looking over the edge once, and her stomach lurched so violently she had to close her eyes. "Don't look down," Caleb called back. "Eyes on Buck's ears. Let him do the work." She focused on the horse's ears, brown and flicked forward, listening to something she couldn't hear. One step at a time. The trail was barely wide enough for the horse's body. Rocks skittered out from under Buck's hooves and disappeared into the void below. Eliza's hands gripped the reins so tight, her knuckles went white. "You're doing fine," Caleb said from ahead. His voice was steady, calm. "Just keep breathing." She wanted to tell him she wasn't fine, that her heart was hammering and her hands were shaking, and she was fairly certain she was about to die. But she kept her mouth shut and kept riding, because turning back wasn't an option, and panicking would only make things worse. When they finally reached the top of the switchback and the trail leveled out, Eliza's entire body was trembling. Caleb rode back to check on her. "You all right?" "No," she said honestly, but you kept going. Didn't have much choice." He looked at her with something that might have been approval. "That's the secret to Montana. You do it anyway, even when you're scared, especially when you're scared." He turned his horse. "Come on, the herd's just ahead." The summer range was a high valley surrounded by peaks, with grass and water and enough space for the cattle to spread out and graze peacefully. Frank was already there with Miguel, having come up the day before. They'd set up a rough camp, a tent, a fire pit, supplies for the week. "Brought company," Caleb announced as they rode in. Frank looked Eliza over, noting the pants and the rifle and the fact that she'd made it up the mountain in one piece. "Well, didn't expect that." "Neither did I," Eliza admitted, sliding off Buck with legs that barely held her weight. They spent 3 hours riding through the herd, checking for injuries, disease, anything that might cause problems. The cattle had spread out across the valley, content and lazy in the mountain grass. A few calves frolicked near their mothers, all gangling legs in curiosity. "Everything looks good," Frank reported. "No signs of predators yet, but it's early. They'll start testing us once they realize there's easy food up here." "Post double watch at night," Caleb said. "And I want that rifle cleaned and loaded at all times." They made the descent as the sun angled toward evening. Going down was somehow worse than going up. Eliza could see exactly how far she could fall if Buck slipped, but the horse moved with sure-footed confidence, and slowly, gradually, her panic eased into something resembling trust. By the time they reached the ranch, full dark had fallen. Thomas was asleep in the loft. Eliza unsaddled Buck with hands that shook from exhaustion, brushed him down the way Miguel had taught her, then stumbled into the house where she collapsed at the kitchen table. Caleb brought her coffee. She drank it black and bitter, too tired to care. "You did well today," he said. "I was terrified." "I know, but you did it anyway." He sat down across from her. Most people would have turned back at the switchback, or refused to go in the first place. "What would be the point of that?" Eliza asked. "The cattle still need checking. The work still needs doing." He studied her in the lamplight, and something in his expression shifted. Catherine refused to go up after the first time, said it was too dangerous and she wasn't going to risk her life for cows. She wasn't wrong. It is dangerous. "But you went anyway." "Yes." "Why?" Eliza considered the question. "Because you're right that you need a partner. And partners don't sit home while the work gets done by someone else." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm starting to think I made the right choice with you." It wasn't a declaration of love or even affection, but coming from him it felt like something. Eliza went to bed that night, so sore she could barely move, but she slept better than she had in weeks. The summer settled into a rhythm. Every few days, Caleb and Eliza would ride up to check the herd. She got better at the mountain trails, learned to read the weather and the clouds, started recognizing individual cattle by their markings. Frank taught her to identify signs of illness: a calf standing apart from the herd, discharge from nostrils, labored breathing. Miguel showed her how to rope, though she was terrible at it and sent the lasso flying in every direction except where she aimed. "You'll get there," Miguel said patiently. "Took me 2 years before I could rope worth a damn." "We don't have 2 years," Eliza said, frustrated. "Winter's coming." "Winter's always coming." Miguel coiled the rope. "That's life in Montana. But you don't have to learn everything at once, just enough to not get killed." The garden produced better than expected. Eliza harvested lettuce and peas and early carrots, preserving what they couldn't eat fresh. She made pickles and relish and canned vegetables for the winter stores. Her hands were permanently stained from beet juice, and her back ached from bending over plants. But the cellar filled up with jars that represented survival through the cold months. Thomas followed her around the garden sometimes, asking questions about the plants and whether they could grow corn next year. "We can try to," Eliza said. "But Frank says the season's too short for corn up here." "Frank says everything's too something," Thomas complained. "Too cold, too short, too dangerous." "Frank's usually right, though." "I guess." Thomas pulled a weed with unnecessary force. "Do you miss Kansas?" Eliza paused, surprised by the question. "No." "Why not?" "Because Kansas never felt like home." "Does Montana?" She looked around at the mountains surrounding them, the endless sky, the garden she'd planted with her own hands. "It's starting to." Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm glad you came." Something warm bloomed in Eliza's chest. "Me too." Town remained hostile, but Eliza stopped caring. She went when necessary, for supplies or to pick up mail, and ignored the whispers and the pointed looks. Clara Beaumont continued her campaign of small cruelties, but Eliza had learned not to engage. Let Clara talk. Words couldn't hurt you if you refused to care about them. But one afternoon in late July, Clara brought reinforcements. Eliza was at the general store collecting nails when a large woman in an expensive dress approached. She had the kind of face that suggested she'd spent her life being obeyed. "You're Eliza Mercer," the woman said. Not a question. "Yes." "I'm Agnes Beaumont, Clara's mother." She looked Eliza up and down with undisguised disdain. "My daughter tells me you're adjusting to frontier life." "I'm managing." "How admirable." Agnes's smile was sharp. "Of course, there's more to being a rancher's wife than simply managing. There are social obligations, responsibilities to the community." Catherine understood that. She hosted the most wonderful gatherings. Everyone adored her. "Here we go again," Eliza thought. "I'm sure she did," Eliza said neutrally. "Will you be hosting the summer social this year?" Agnes asked. "It's tradition. The Mercer Ranch has always hosted. Catherine would have been devastated to see that tradition die." Eliza had no idea what the summer social was. "I'll discuss it with my husband." "Of course you will." Agnes's voice dripped with false sympathy. "Though I imagine Caleb must miss having a wife who actually understood how to entertain. Catherine was so gracious, so elegant, such a loss." Clara appeared at her mother's elbow, smiling like she'd just won something. "Perhaps we could host the social this year," Clara suggested sweetly. "At the hotel. Since Mrs. Mercer seems overwhelmed by ranch duties." It was a trap. If Eliza agreed, she'd be admitting defeat, letting Clara take over a tradition that belonged to the Mercer Ranch. If she refused, she'd be expected to host an event she knew nothing about for people who hated her. "That won't be necessary," Eliza said. "We'll host." Agnes raised her eyebrows. "Will you? How delightful. Of course, Catherine always served champagne and had musicians brought in from Denver, and the decorations were simply exquisite. I do hope you can manage something similar." "I'll do my best," Eliza said flatly. She collected her nails and left while mother and daughter exchanged satisfied looks. On the ride home, her anger built like a storm. She'd been manipulated into hosting a party she didn't want, for people who despised her, to honor the memory of a dead woman she could never measure up to. And the worst part was knowing that whatever she did, it would be judged harshly and found lacking. Caleb was in the barn when she arrived. She found him repairing a broken harness, his hands working the leather with practiced ease. "We're hosting the summer social she announced. He looked up, surprised. "What?" "Agnes and Clara Beaumont cornered me in town. Apparently it's tradition. Catherine always hosted. They made it clear I'm expected to do the same." "You don't have to eat." "Yes, I do," Eliza cut him off. "Because if I don't, Clara will host it instead, and everyone will talk about how the plain mail order bride couldn't handle the responsibility." Caleb set down the harness. "You care what people think?" "No, but I care about this ranch, and I won't let them use your dead wife's memory to make you look weak." He was quiet for a moment. Catherine hated those parties. She complained for weeks leading up to them, then put on a smile and played hostess because that's what people expected. "Well, I'm not going to complain," Eliza said. "I'm just going to do it." "You don't know how? Then teach me. Or don't. Either way, it's happening." She turned to leave, then stopped. "When is it?" "First Saturday in August." 3 weeks. She had 3 weeks to figure out how to host a party for people who wanted her to fail. Eliza enlisted help from the only person who might actually provide it, Frank's wife, Mary, who lived in a cabin on the edge of the ranch property. Mary was a practical woman in her 60s who'd raised 5 children and buried 2. She didn't care about social niceties or Catherine's legacy. She cared about getting things done. "Summer social's a big deal around here," Mary said when Eliza explained the situation. "Whole valley comes. It's supposed to celebrate making it through another year without dying." "That's cheerful," Eliza said. Mary laughed. "That's Montana. All right, here's what you need. Food, lots of it. Drink, probably beer and whiskey since you can't afford champagne. Music, someone with a fiddle or guitar. And space for people to gather and pretend they like each other." "That's it?" "That's it. Catherine made it fancy because she was trying to prove something. You don't need to prove anything. You just need to not poison anyone or burn the house down." "Those are achievable goals," Eliza said. They spent the next 3 weeks preparing. Eliza baked for days. Bread, pies, cakes, cookies. She butchered chickens and a pig, smoking and roasting meat until the ranch smelled like a permanent feast. She cleaned the house until it gleamed, moved furniture to create space, strung lanterns outside for when the sun set. Thomas helped, excited by the novelty of having people come to the ranch. "Will there be other children?" he asked hopefully. "Probably," Eliza said. "You can show them your room if you want." "Really?" He looked surprised. "Mother never let children upstairs." "Your mother had her rules. I have mine." Caleb watched the preparations with something approaching concern. "You're doing too much," he said the day before the social. "You'll exhaust yourself." "I'm fine." "You're not sleeping." "I'll sleep after it's over." He caught her arm as she rushed past with another tray of biscuits. "Eliza, stop." She stopped, mostly because his hand on her arm sent an electric jolt through her that had nothing to do with the party. "They're going to judge you no matter what you do," Caleb said quietly. "You could serve them gold on silver platters, and they'd still compare you to Catherine." "I know. So why are you killing yourself over this?" "Because," Eliza said, meeting his eyes, "I'm tired of people thinking I don't belong here. And if I have to throw a perfect party to prove I do, then that's what I'll do." His hand was still on her arm. His gray eyes searched her face like he was looking for something he couldn't quite find. "You don't have to prove anything to me," he said. "I'm not doing it for you," Eliza said. "I'm doing it for me." She pulled away and went back to her baking, but she felt his gaze following her. The first Saturday in August arrived hot and clear. People started arriving mid-afternoon, families in wagons, single men on horseback, everyone dressed in their best clothes. Eliza watched from the porch as the valley emptied itself onto her property. Clara Beaumont arrived in a dress that cost more than Eliza would earn in a year. She stepped down from the hotel carriage like a queen surveying her kingdom, her eyes scanning the ranch with obvious anticipation of finding something to criticize. "Mrs. Mercer," Clara said, approaching with her mother. "What a rustic setup." "Thank you," Eliza said, refusing to take the bait. Agnes surveyed the tables laden with food. "No champagne?" "We have beer and whiskey," Eliza said. "This is Montana, not New York." "How provincial," Agnes murmured. But people were already eating, complimenting the food, gathering in clusters to talk and laugh. A ranch hand named Pete had brought his guitar and started playing, and someone else produced a fiddle. Music filled the evening air. Thomas ran past with 3 other children, actually smiling, and Eliza felt something in her chest ease. "You did good," Frank said, appearing at her elbow with a plate piled high. "This is better than half of Catherine's parties. At least people can relax instead of worrying about using the wrong fork." "There are right and wrong forks?" Eliza asked. "Apparently." Frank grinned. "See? You're already better at this than you thought." The evening progressed. People ate and drank and danced as the sun set behind the mountains. Clara sulked in a corner with a few of her friends, but most people seemed to be enjoying themselves. Even Agnes Beaumont grudgingly admitted the food was acceptable. Caleb appeared at Eliza's side as the sky darkened. "You should eat something. You've been running around all day." "I will, after now," he said firmly. He took her elbow and steered her toward a quiet corner where a plate waited. "Sit, eat. That's an order." Eliza sat, too exhausted to argue. The food tasted better than she'd expected, or maybe she was just starving. Caleb sat beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. "You pulled it off." "Did I?" "Everyone's having a good time. The food's excellent. No one's died or gotten into a fistfight." He paused. Catherine's parties usually had at least one fistfight. Eliza looked at him. "Really?" "Really. Turns out people don't like being forced to pretend they're civilized." He gestured at the crowd. "This is better. It's honest." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the party unfold around them. Someone started a square dance, and couples formed up while Pete called out the steps. Thomas was trying to dance with a girl his age, stepping on her feet and laughing when she stepped on his. "He's smiling," Caleb said quietly. "Haven't seen him smile like that since before Catherine died." "He's a good kid," Eliza said. "He likes you better than he ever liked his mother." Caleb's voice was rough. "That should probably bother me more than it does." Eliza didn't know what to say to that. "Catherine loved him," Caleb continued, "but she didn't know how to show it. She was always worried about him being proper, behaving correctly, not embarrassing her in front of people." He watched his son dance. "You just let him be a kid." "That's all he should have to be," Eliza said. Caleb turned to look at her, and in the lamplight his face was softer than she'd ever seen it. "I'm glad you came to Montana." Her heart did something complicated in her chest. "So am I. Even though the town hates you and Clara Beaumont's plotting your downfall and Winter's going to try to kill you? Even though all of that." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then someone called his name, needing help with something, and he stood. But before he walked away, he squeezed her shoulder briefly, a gesture of warmth, of connection, of something she didn't dare name yet. The party lasted until midnight. People finally started leaving, calling goodbyes and thanks, several women grudgingly admitting the food had been quite good, and the evening pleasant. Even Agnes Beaumont conceded it had been adequate. Clara left without saying goodbye, her expression sour. After everyone had gone, Eliza and Mary cleaned up while the men moved furniture back into place. Thomas had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted and happy. Caleb carried him upstairs to the loft while Eliza finished washing the last of the dishes. When the house was finally quiet and clean, she stepped outside to breathe the cool night air. The stars were impossibly bright, scattered across the sky like someone had spilled diamonds. She could hear the cattle lowing in the distance, the horses shifting in the corrals, all the sounds of the ranch settling into sleep. She'd survived the summer social. She'd proven she could do what Catherine had done, in her own way. But more than that, she'd started to feel like she belonged here. Like Montana wasn't just a place she'd fled to. It was a place she'd chosen. And maybe, just maybe, Caleb was starting to see her as more than just a practical arrangement. The thought scared her more than any mountain trail. August slipped into September, and the temperature dropped like Montana had finally remembered what it was supposed to do. The mornings came with frost that killed the last of the garden plants overnight. Eliza harvested what remained, squash, pumpkins, the final struggling tomatoes, and hauled it all to the root cellar while her breath came out in clouds. "First frost means 6 weeks until snow," Frank said, helping her carry a crate of potatoes. "Maybe less this year. Sky's got that look." "What look?" Eliza asked. "Hard to explain. You'll recognize it when you see enough winters." He set down the crate. "We need to bring the herd down soon. Another week, maybe 2 at most. The cattle came down from summer range on a cold Tuesday morning that felt like winter testing its reach. Eliza rode with Caleb in the hands, pushing 300 head down the mountain trails she'd learned to navigate over the summer. The cattle moved slow and stubborn, unhappy about leaving the high grass, and it took both days to get them settled in the lower pastures. That night, exhausted and sore, Eliza fell asleep at the kitchen table over her untouched dinner. She woke to find herself in bed, still fully dressed, with no memory of how she'd gotten there. When she emerged the next morning, Caleb was already up, making coffee. "You carried me?" she asked. "You were unconscious, couldn't just leave you at the table." He poured her coffee without looking at her. "You're working too hard." "So are you." "I'm used to it." "Then I'll get used to it too." He finally looked at her, and something in his expression was softer than usual. "You're stubborn." "Yes," Eliza agreed. "I've been told." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, an actual smile, small but real. "Good. You'll need that." The railroad contract arrived on a Thursday. Caleb opened it at breakfast, read it twice, then set it down with a tight expression. "Problem?" Eliza asked. "Opportunity. Maybe." He pushed the letter toward her. "Read it." The letter was from a land speculator named Warren Hale, proposing a deal. The railroad was expanding through Montana territory, and they needed land for the route. Hale was offering to buy a section of Mercer property, the eastern pasture, for what seemed like a substantial sum. "That's a lot of money," Eliza said. "It is. But the eastern pasture is our best winter grazing. Without it, we'd have to cut the herd by a third, maybe more." Caleb took the letter back. "And Warren Hale is a snake. If he's offering this much, the land's probably worth twice that to the railroad. So negotiate for more. It's not about the money, it's about losing the land." He stared at the letter like it had personally offended him. "My father bought this ranch when Montana was still wild territory, built it from nothing. Every acre matters." Eliza understood that kind of attachment. "Then tell him no." "It's not that simple. Hale's connected. He's got lawyers and politicians in his pocket. If I refuse outright, he might find ways to make things difficult." "Such as?" "Water rights, grazing permits, 100 small legal problems that add up to big trouble." Caleb rubbed his face. "I need to think about this." But he didn't get time to think. 3 days later, Warren Hale showed up at the ranch in person. He arrived in a fancy carriage pulled by matched horses, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than most people's houses. He was maybe 50, with silver hair and the kind of smooth, confident face that came from never being told no. "Mr. Mercer," Hale said, extending his hand. "Pleasure to finally meet in person." Caleb shook hands with obvious reluctance. "Mr. Hale. And this must be your new wife." Hale turned to Eliza with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'd heard you'd remarried. How delightful." "My wife, Eliza," Caleb said flatly. "Charming." Hale's gaze traveled over her in a way that made Eliza's skin crawl. "Quite different from Catherine, I understand. More practical." "What do you want, Hale?" Caleb asked. "Straight to business. I appreciate that." Hale gestured toward the house. "Perhaps we could discuss this inside? It's rather cold out here." They settled in the main room. Eliza brought coffee she didn't want to serve, and Hale accepted it with the air of someone doing them a favor by drinking it. "I assume you received my proposal," Hale said. "I did." "And?" "I'm considering it." Hale's smile widened. "Excellent. Of course, the offer is time-sensitive. The railroad needs to finalize the route by November. If you're interested, we should move quickly." "Why the eastern pasture specifically?" Caleb asked. "There's plenty of other land in the valley." "The railroad requires particular terrain, flat, accessible, minimal complications." Hale sipped his coffee. "Your land is ideal, and I'm prepared to be generous." "Generous enough to pay what it's actually worth?" "I'm paying exactly what it's worth, Mr. Mercer. Land value is determined by what someone is willing to pay. I'm willing to pay quite a bit." "But not as much as the railroad's paying you," Eliza said. Both men looked at her. Hale's expression remained pleasant, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "I beg your pardon?" "You're buying the land from us, then selling it to the railroad for more," Eliza said. "That's how this works, isn't it? You're the middleman." "I'm a facilitator," Hale corrected smoothly. "I assume the risk. handle the legal complexities, ensure the transaction proceeds smoothly. That service has value. How much value? Eliza asked. What's the railroad actually paying? Hale's smile tightened. That's confidential business information. So we're supposed to trust you're being fair. My dear Mrs. Mercer, this is how business is conducted. If you find the terms unsatisfactory, you're welcome to decline. He set down his cup with deliberate care. Of course, declining has its own complications. Is that a threat? Caleb asked quietly. Merely an observation. Hale stood. The railroad will get its route one way or another. It would be simpler for everyone if we could come to an agreement, but if you prefer the alternative, he let the sentence hang. Get off my property, Caleb said. Hale's pleasant expression never wavered. Think about my offer, Mr. Mercer. I'll be in town through the end of the month. After that, I'll be forced to pursue other options. He nodded to Eliza. Mrs. Mercer, a pleasure. He left in his fancy carriage, and Caleb stood at the window watching him go with his jaw clenched tight. He's going to cause trouble, Eliza said. I know. What kind of trouble? The kind that's legal enough to be hard to fight. Caleb turned away from the window. He'll tie us up in paperwork and permits and regulations until it's easier to sell than to keep fighting. Is there anyone who can help? A lawyer? The only lawyer in Clearwater works for Hale's business partner. Caleb sat down heavily. We're on our own. Eliza thought about this. Then we need to find out what the railroad's actually paying him. If we can prove he's defrauding you, maybe that gives us leverage. How do you propose we do that? I don't know yet, but there has to be a way. Over the following week, Warren Hale made his presence known. He bought drinks at the saloon, made friends with the town council, donated money to the church. He was charming and generous and everywhere at once, building goodwill like someone constructing a fortress. And he talked, casually, carefully, about how sad it was that Caleb Mercer was so resistant to progress, how the railroad could bring prosperity to the valley, but certain people were standing in the way, how sometimes personal attachments blinded men to what was best for the community. He's turning the town against you, Frank reported after a trip to Clearwater. Half the people think you're being selfish. The other half think Hale's a con artist, but they're keeping quiet because he's got money. Let them think what they want, Caleb said. It matters when Hale starts influencing the land office and the territorial government, Frank said. He's building a case that you're an obstruction. Give him enough time and he'll find a way to take that land whether you agree or not. Eliza spent her evenings going through the ranch accounts, looking for something, anything, that might help. The numbers told a clear story. Mercer Ranch was successful, but not wealthy. They had enough to survive, even prosper in good years, but they didn't have the resources to fight a prolonged legal battle against someone with Hale's connections and money. She was deep in ledgers one night when Thomas appeared at her elbow. You're always working now, he said. Sorry, there's just a lot to do. Father's worried. I can tell. Eliza looked at the boy. He was 8 years old, but his eyes were older. He is worried, but we'll figure it out. Will Mr. Hale take our ranch? Not if we can help it. Thomas was quiet for a moment. I heard him talking in town. Mr. Hale. He was with Miss Beaumont. Eliza's attention sharpened. What were they saying? I don't know. I wasn't supposed to be listening, but Miss Beaumont was laughing about something, and Mr. Hale said... He scrunched up his face, trying to remember. He said the railroad would pay double what Mercer's land was worth, and he'd split the profit with his partners. Partners, Eliza repeated. Did he say who? No, but Miss Beaumont seemed happy about it. After Thomas went to bed, Eliza sat in the quiet kitchen turning this information over. If Clara Beaumont was involved with Hale's scheme, that meant her family probably was too. And the Beaumonts owned half of Clearwater. They had influence, connections, the kind of social power that could make or break someone. The next morning, she rode into town alone. Clara was at the hotel her family owned, overseeing some kind of renovation. She looked surprised to see Eliza walk through the door. Mrs. Mercer, Clara said with false warmth, what brings you to town? I need to speak with you, privately. Clara's eyebrows rose, but she led Eliza to a small office off the lobby. This is unexpected. I wasn't aware we had anything to discuss. Warren Hale, Eliza said. Clara's expression flickered, just for a moment, but Eliza caught it. What about him? He's trying to buy our land, And somehow you're involved. I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, Eliza said flatly. I know he's promised you a cut of the profits. I just want to understand why. Clara's pleasant mask slipped. You want to understand why? Fine. I'll tell you. She leaned against the desk, her arms crossed. Your husband should have been mine. Everyone knew it. We grew up together. Our families expected it. And then Catherine came along with her beauty and her charm, and suddenly Caleb couldn't see anyone else. So this is revenge? Eliza asked. This is business, Clara corrected. When Catherine died, I thought finally, I'd have a chance. And then you showed up. You, with your plain face and your mail-order bride desperation. You took what should have been mine. Caleb was never yours to take. He should have been, Clara's voice turned sharp. So yes, when Warren approached me about the railroad deal, I was happy to help. He gets his profit. My family gets a percentage. And Caleb learns that marrying you instead of me has consequences. You're willing to destroy his ranch because your feelings were hurt? Eliza couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. I'm willing to do business with someone who sees opportunity, Clara said. The ranch won't be destroyed, just diminished. Caleb will have to sell more land eventually, probably to me, and maybe then he'll realize what he gave up. Eliza stared at this woman who was so beautiful and so petty. You're pathetic. Clara's face flushed red. Get out. Gladly. Eliza left the hotel and rode straight back to the ranch, her mind racing. She had confirmation now that Hale and the Beaumonts were working together, but that didn't give her leverage. If anything, it made their position worse. Fighting Hale meant fighting the most powerful family in Clearwater. She found Caleb in the barn, shoeing a horse. He looked up when she entered, reading trouble in her face. What happened? She told him everything. Thomas overhearing the conversation, her confrontation with Clara, the confession about the partnership. Caleb set down his tools carefully, like he was concentrating very hard on not putting his fist through something. The Beaumonts. Yes. This is about Clara being angry I married someone else. Partially, but it's also about money. Eliza pulled out the paper where she'd done calculations. If the railroad's paying double what Hale offered you, and he's splitting the profit with partners, he stands to make a fortune. So do the Beaumonts. Which means they'll fight harder to make sure the deal goes through, Caleb said grimly. Yes. He was quiet for a long moment. We can't win this, not against Hale and the Beaumonts both. Maybe not in a fight, Eliza said slowly, but what if we don't fight? What do you mean? What if we go directly to the railroad? Caleb frowned. They're working through Hale, because he approached them first. But if we offer to sell directly, cut out the middleman, the railroad saves money, and we get a better price. Hale probably has a contract. Contracts can be broken if there's a better option. Eliza's mind was working fast now, seeing the angles. And if we can prove Hale was defrauding both us and the railroad, inflating prices, hiding the real value, they'd have grounds to cancel whatever agreement they have with him. Caleb studied her with something approaching wonder. Where did you learn to think like this? I managed my family's household for 8 years, Eliza said. My mother was always trying to get more credit than we deserved, and merchants were always trying to charge us more than things cost. You learn to see the angles when survival depends on it. The railroad offices are in Denver, Caleb said. That's a week's travel at least. Then we should leave soon, before Hale realizes what we're doing. We? He looked at her. You want to come? You need someone who understands the numbers and can negotiate. That's me. Eliza met his gaze steadily. Besides, I told you, I'm your partner. Something shifted in Caleb's expression, surprise, respect, and something warmer that he didn't quite hide fast enough. All right, we'll leave in 2 days. I'll arrange for Frank to manage the ranch while we're gone. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Eliza organized all the financial records, land surveys, and contracts into a case that proved exactly what the eastern pasture was worth. She calculated costs and profits, prepared arguments, anticipated questions. At night, she rehearsed presentations until the words were automatic. Thomas was unhappy about them leaving. What if something happens? He asked the night before they were set to depart. Frank's here, Caleb said. And Mary. You'll be fine. But what if you don't come back? The fear in his voice was raw and real, the fear of a child who'd already lost one parent. Eliza crouched down to his level. We're coming back, I promise. Mother promised too, Thomas said quietly. She promised she'd be fine, and then she died. Caleb's face went tight, but Eliza held Thomas's gaze. You're right. Sometimes promises get broken through no fault of anyone. But your father and I are going to Denver, not into a dangerous situation. We're just talking to people about land, that's all. And you'll come back? We'll come back, Eliza said. And when we do, I'll read you the rest of that pirate book. We still have 8 chapters left. Thomas studied her face, searching for lies. Finally, he nodded. Okay, they left at dawn. The journey to Denver took 6 days. 2 by wagon to the train station, 4 by rail heading south and east. Eliza watched Montana disappear through the train window, replaced by Wyoming and then Colorado, the mountains giving way to plains that reminded her uncomfortably of Kansas. Caleb sat across from her in the train car, reviewing the documents for the 100th time. Stop, Eliza said. You're going to wear holes in the paper. I want to be prepared. You are prepared. We both are. She took the papers from him and set them aside. Now rest. You'll need your energy for the actual meeting. He leaned back against the seat, but his hands kept moving, drumming fingers, adjusting his collar, checking his pocket watch. He was nervous. She'd never seen him nervous before. What if this doesn't work? He asked quietly. Then we'll figure out another option. There might not be another option. There's always another option, Eliza said. It just might not be the one we want. He looked at her then, really looked, and his expression was unguarded in a way she'd never seen. When did you get so strong? I've always been strong, Eliza said. People just never noticed because I wasn't pretty. I noticed, Caleb said. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Eliza felt her cheeks heat, and she looked away, suddenly uncertain how to respond. The first day you arrived, Caleb continued, you stood on that platform looking exhausted and scared and determined. I thought, this woman traveled 4 days alone to marry a stranger. That takes strength. Or desperation, Eliza said. Maybe both. He was still watching her. But you've proven it wasn't desperation. You've worked harder than anyone I've ever known. You learned to ride in mountains that terrify grown men. You threw a party for people who wanted you to fail, and you made it succeed. You're fighting for this ranch like it's yours, even though you've only been here a few months. It is mine, Eliza said quietly. I married you. That makes it mine too. I know. But most people wouldn't see it that way. They'd see it as my problem, not theirs. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. I'm starting to think I got the better end of this arrangement. Eliza's heart was hammering in her chest. You promised fairness, not love. Remember? I remember. His gray eyes held hers. But sometimes things change. Before Eliza could respond, before she could even figure out what she wanted to say, the train lurched to a stop at a station, and the moment shattered. People began moving, gathering belongings, and Caleb stood to help an elderly woman with her luggage. Eliza sat in her seat, her hands shaking slightly, trying to process what had just happened. Was Caleb saying he had feelings for her? Real feelings, not just respect or appreciation? And more terrifyingly, did she have feelings for him? She'd spent so long telling herself this was just a practical arrangement, a business partnership. She'd worked hard to keep her emotions locked away because caring about someone meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant pain. But somewhere between learning to ride mountain trails and throwing summer socials and fighting for the ranch's survival, she'd started to care about more than just having a place to belong. She'd started to care about Caleb, about Thomas, about this cold, harsh, beautiful place that had given her a chance to be someone other than the ugly sister nobody wanted. She'd started to care, and that terrified her more than anything Montana could throw at her. Denver was loud and crowded and overwhelming after months in the wilderness. Eliza and Caleb checked into a modest hotel near the railroad offices, taking separate rooms that shared a wall. That night, lying in bed listening to the sounds of the city, Eliza barely slept. The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock the next morning. They arrived early, both dressed in their best clothes. Caleb wore a suit he'd had made years ago that was slightly outdated but still respectable. Eliza wore her wedding dress, the only nice thing she owned, with her hair pinned up and her hands clasped to hide their shaking. The railroad office was all dark wood and brass fixtures designed to intimidate. The executive who met them, a thin man named Roberts with wire-frame spectacles, looked them over with barely concealed skepticism. "Mr. and Mrs. Mercer," he said, "I understand you wanted to discuss a land matter?" "Yes," Caleb said. "We understand you're negotiating with Warren Hale to purchase land in Montana Territory for a rail route. We may be in discussions with several parties," Robert said carefully. "I'm not at liberty to discuss specific negotiations." "Then let me make this simple," Eliza said, opening her case. "Mr. Hale is offering to sell you land he doesn't own yet. Land he's trying to purchase from us for less than half what it's worth, so he can turn around and sell it to you at an inflated price." Roberts's eyebrows rose. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a true one." Eliza spread documents across his desk, land surveys, market valuations, records of what similar properties had sold for. "This is what our land is actually worth. This is what Hale offered us, and based on standard markup for this kind of transaction, this is likely what he's charging you." Roberts leaned forward, studying the papers. His skepticism was shifting to interest. "We're proposing to sell directly to you," Caleb said. "Cut out the middleman. You save money. We get fair value. Everyone wins except Hale." "And why would you do this?" Roberts asked. "Sell to us instead of negotiating a better price with Hale?" "Because Hale isn't negotiating in good faith," Eliza said. "He's using political connections and legal pressure to force us into a bad deal. We'd rather work with people who are honest." Roberts was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled under his chin. "Mr. Hale has been very helpful to us. He's facilitated several land purchases already." "At what cost?" Eliza asked. "That's confidential." "Then compare it to what we're offering. If Hale's deals are genuinely fair, you'll know immediately." She met Robert's gaze steadily. "But if they're not, if he's been overcharging you this entire time, wouldn't you want to know?" Robert studied them both, clearly weighing options. Finally, he said, "Wait here." He left the office. Caleb and Eliza sat in tense silence while minutes ticked by. 15 minutes became 30. 30 became an hour. "Maybe this was a mistake," Caleb said quietly. "Give him time," Eliza said, though her own stomach was churning. Finally, Roberts returned. His expression was carefully neutral. "I've reviewed our existing contracts with Mr. Hale," he said, "and compared them to your proposal." "And?" Caleb asked. "And it appears you're correct. Mr. Hale has been overestimating costs." Roberts's voice was dry. "Significantly." Eliza felt relief flood through her chest. "We're interested in your proposal," Roberts continued. "Assuming the land survey checks out and the title is clear, we'd be willing to purchase directly from you, at fair market value." "Which is?" Caleb asked. Roberts named a figure that was nearly triple what Hale had offered. Caleb's hand found Eliza's under the table and squeezed hard. "However," Roberts said, "I must inform you that Mr. Hale will likely take legal action. He has a contract with us that includes exclusivity clauses. Breaking it will be complicated." "Can you break it?" Eliza asked. "With proper cause, yes. Fraud would be proper cause." Roberts removed his spectacles and cleaned them slowly. "Of course, proving fraud requires documentation, evidence that Mr. Hale deliberately misrepresented values." "We have that," Eliza said. She pulled out more papers, records of what Hale had claimed the land was worth versus what it actually was. Testimony from other ranchers he'd approached, patterns of deception across multiple deals. Roberts reviewed everything with increasing interest. When he finished, he looked at them with something approaching respect. "Mrs. Mercer, you should have been a lawyer." "I just pay attention," Eliza said. "Well, you've given us more than enough to void our contract with Hale and pursue charges if we choose." Roberts stood and extended his hand. "Welcome to business with the railroad. I'll have our lawyers draw up the proper documents. You should have a contract ready to sign within the week." They shook hands. As they left the office, Eliza's legs felt weak with relief and residual fear. They made it to the hotel before Caleb pulled her into a fierce hug that lifted her off her feet. "You did it," he said into her hair. "We did it." "We did," Eliza agreed, her arms wrapped around his neck. He set her down but didn't let go immediately. They stood in the hotel hallway, too close, both breathing hard from relief and adrenaline and something else neither of them was ready to name. "Thank you," Caleb said quietly. For what? For fighting for the ranch. For being smart and brave and refusing to give up. His hands were on her shoulders, his gray eyes intense. For being exactly what I needed, even though I didn't know it. Eliza's heart was hammering. Caleb, I know what I said, he interrupted, about not promising love, but I'm starting to think that was a promise I can't keep. Before she could respond, before she could even process what he was saying, he leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate and relieved and full of months of repressed feeling. Eliza kissed him back without thinking, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. That was probably a mistake, he said. Probably, Eliza agreed. Should we talk about it? Later, she said. Right now, let's just be glad we saved the ranch. He smiled, a real full smile she'd never seen before. Later, then. They traveled back to Montana in a daze of victory and confused feelings. The railroad sent word ahead that Warren Hale's contract had been voided due to fraud, and that charges might be filed. By the time Eliza and Caleb arrived back in Clearwater, the whole town knew. Warren Hale had left Montana Territory in the middle of the night, abandoning his deals and his partners. The Beaumonts were furious and humiliated, their involvement in the scheme now public knowledge. And Caleb Mercer's plain mail-order bride had just outmaneuvered the most powerful people in the valley. Frank met them at the ranch with a grin. Whole town's talking about you two. Half of them are calling Mrs. Mercer a genius. The other half are calling her a witch. I'll take either, Eliza said. Thomas ran out of the house and threw himself at both of them. You came back! Told you we would, Eliza said, hugging him tight. That night, after Thomas went to bed, Eliza and Caleb sat at the kitchen table with coffee. The house was quiet around them. Outside, the first real snow of the season was falling. We should talk, Caleb said finally. About Denver? About what I said, and did. He wrapped his hands around his coffee mug. I meant it, all of it. Eliza's heart raced. I don't know how to do this. Do what? This. Whatever this is. She gestured between them. I came here expecting a business arrangement. I never thought, I didn't plan. Neither did I, Caleb said quietly. After Catherine died, I thought that part of me was dead too. I wasn't looking for love. Hell, I didn't want love. It hurt too much the first time. But you're not Catherine. You're nothing like her. He reached across the table and took her hand. You're strong where she was fragile, honest where she was performing. You fight for things instead of complaining about them. And somewhere between teaching you to ride and watching you outmaneuver Warren Hale, I realized I'd fallen for you. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. I'm not beautiful. Yes, you are, Caleb said. Just not in the way people usually mean. That's not... It's true, he interrupted. You're beautiful when you're covered in dirt from the garden, when you're cursing at the cow for kicking you, when you're so tired you can barely stand but you keep working anyway, when you're reading to Thomas with that serious expression, when you're negotiating with railroad executives like you own the whole territory. He squeezed her hand. You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, and I was an idiot not to realize it sooner. A tear escaped despite her best efforts. I fell for you too. I didn't want to. I kept telling myself it was just a partnership, but it stopped being just that a long time ago. When? Caleb asked. I think that first day you carried me to bed when I fell asleep. Or maybe when you gave me your wife's coat and didn't make it weird. Or when you told me I did well on the mountain even though I was terrified. She wiped at her eyes. It's been so gradual I didn't notice until suddenly I cared more about you than I cared about proving myself. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of these confessions settling between them. So what now? Eliza asked. Now, Caleb said. Will we stop pretending this is just business? We're married. We love each other. Let's act like it. That's simple? That's simple. But Eliza knew it wouldn't be simple. Life in Montana was never simple. Winter was coming, the hardest winter she'd face yet. The town still didn't fully accept her. Claire Beaumont would never forgive her. There would be challenges and hardships and 100 ways for things to go wrong. But sitting in this kitchen with her hand in Caleb's, snow falling outside and warmth spreading through her chest, Eliza thought maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found something worth all the difficulty. She'd found a place where courage mattered more than beauty, a place where she was valued for her strength instead of mocked for her plainness, a place where someone finally saw her exactly as she was and loved her for it. "All right," she said, "let's try simple." Caleb smiled and pulled her to her feet, and this time when he kissed her, it wasn't desperate or confused. It was a promise. And unlike the winter waiting outside, this was a promise they both intended to keep. The snow came earlier that year, arriving in October with a vengeance that suggested Montana had grown tired of being patient. Eliza woke one morning to find the world transformed, white and silent and beautiful in a way that would have been peaceful if it hadn't been so clearly dangerous. "First real snow," Caleb said, standing at the window with his coffee. "And it's heavy. We might be in for a rough winter." He was right. By November, they'd already had 3 blizzards. The temperature dropped so low that water left outside froze solid within minutes. The cattle huddled in the lower pastures, their breath coming out in clouds, and the hands took shifts checking them every few hours to make sure none wandered off and froze to death. Eliza learned what winter really meant in Montana. It meant waking before dawn to break ice on the water troughs. It meant hauling wood constantly to keep the fires burning. It meant cooking massive amounts of food because everyone was burning calories just trying to stay warm. It meant darkness falling at 4 o'clock and not lifting again until 8 the next morning. It meant isolation. The road to town became impassable after the first big storm. They were cut off, alone with the ranch and each other in the cold that pressed against the walls like something living. But something had shifted between her and Caleb. They'd stopped sleeping in separate rooms. She'd moved her few belongings into his bedroom, their bedroom now, and at night they'd lie tangled together under heavy quilts while wind screamed outside and the house creaked like a ship at sea. "Tell me about Kansas," Caleb said one night, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "Why? It's boring." "I want to know anyway." So she told him about her sisters and their casual cruelty, about her mother's disappointment every time she looked at Eliza, about spending 23 years being invisible, convinced that plainness meant worthlessness. "They were wrong," Caleb said when she finished. "I know that now." "No, I mean, they were stupid." He shifted to look at her in the dim firelight. "Anyone with eyes could see you were worth something. They just chose not to look." "You looked," Eliza said quietly. "I did. And I got lucky." He kissed her forehead. "Luckiest I've ever been," answering that letter. Thomas had noticed the change too. One morning at breakfast, he looked between them with serious eyes and asked, "Are you married now? Not just paper married?" "What's the difference?" Caleb asked. "Paper married is when you live in the same house but don't really like each other," Thomas explained with the matter-of-fact wisdom of children. Married is when you actually want to be together." Eliza and Caleb exchanged glances. "Yeah," Caleb said. "We're married now." Thomas nodded, satisfied. "Good. I like it better this way." The 3rd week of November brought news from town via Frank, who'd made the dangerous trek through the snow to pick up supplies and check for mail. "Clara Beaumont's engaged," he announced, stomping snow off his boots, "to some banker from Helena. Agnes arranged it, probably trying to rebuild the family reputation after the hail disaster." "Good for her," Eliza said, and meant it. She'd stopped thinking about Clara months ago. "Also, there's talk the territorial governor might investigate the land fraud scheme," Frank continued. "Could bring down half the speculators operating in Montana if they dig deep enough." "Let them dig," Caleb said. He was reviewing the winter supply inventory, making sure they had enough to last until spring. "We're done with that business." But Montana wasn't done testing them. December arrived with the blizzard that lasted 4 days. The wind howled like something alive and furious, driving snow horizontal across the valley. Visibility dropped to nothing. The temperature plummeted to 20 below zero, then 30, then lower still. On the 2nd day, they lost a section of fence. The cattle in that pasture scattered into the storm. "We have to bring them back," Caleb said, already pulling on layers of wool and canvas. "In this?" Eliza looked at the wall of white outside the window. "You can't even see 5 feet. If they wander too far, they'll freeze or fall into a ravine. We lose that herd, we lose a third of our breeding stock." He strapped on his gun belt. I'm going. You stay here with Thomas. No, Eliza said. He turned, surprised. What? No, you're not going alone. She was already moving toward her own winter gear, the heavy coat, the canvas pants, the boots lined with fleece. If you get lost in that storm, you die. You need someone to hold the rope, guide you back. Eliza, don't argue with me about this, she said, pulling on gloves. You said you needed a partner. Partners don't let each other ride into storms alone. Something fierce and proud flashed across his face. You're terrified of blizzards. I'm terrified of being a widow, Eliza corrected. Let's go. Frank and Miguel were already in the barn, saddling horses that looked as unhappy about the situation as any creature with sense should be. The plan was simple but brutal. Rope themselves together, ride to where the fence had failed, and drive whatever cattle they could find back toward the ranch. This is insane, Miguel said, but he was saddling up anyway. Yeah, Frank agreed, but it's that, or watch them die. They rode out into hell. The wind hit like a physical force, nearly knocking Eliza out of the saddle. Snow drove into her face so hard she had to squint her eyes nearly shut. Within minutes, she couldn't feel her fingers despite the gloves. Within 10 minutes, she couldn't see the ranch behind them anymore. The only thing tethering her to reality was the rope tied between her horse and Caleb's, a lifeline in the whiteout. They found the fence break by nearly riding into it, collapsed posts and broken wire buried under drifts. Beyond it, shapes moved in the storm, cattle, disoriented and scared, wandering in circles. Caleb shouted something that the wind tore away. He gestured, spread out, drive them back. Eliza nudged Buck toward the left flank while Frank went right and Miguel stayed at the back. Driving cattle in a blizzard required a kind of blind faith that everything would work out, despite all evidence to the contrary. Eliza couldn't see where she was going, couldn't tell if she was heading toward the ranch or deeper into wilderness. She just kept pushing the cattle forward, trusting Buck to know the way home, trusting the rope wouldn't snap, trusting Caleb was still there ahead of her. One cow broke from the group, running blind into the storm. Eliza turned Buck to follow, but the horse balked, refusing to go further. She pulled harder on the reins, and Buck reared slightly, panicked. That's when she saw why. 3 feet ahead, the ground disappeared into a ravine she couldn't see the bottom of. If Buck had kept going, they both would have fallen. Easy, she whispered, patting the horse's neck with shaking hands. Easy, you were right. Good boy. She abandoned the cow, one loss was better than 2, and pushed back toward where she hoped the others were. Time stopped meaning anything. Minutes felt like hours. The cold had moved past pain into numbness. Her face felt frozen. Her lungs burned from breathing air that was more ice than oxygen. When the barn finally materialized out of the storm, she wanted to cry with relief. They drove the cattle into the shelter near the barn, counting heads. They'd gotten most of them back. Lost maybe 10 to the storm, either dead or too far gone to find. Inside the barn, out of the wind, they stripped off the layers of frozen clothing and checked for frostbite. Miguel had it on his ears. Frank's nose was white and bloodless. Caleb's hands were so cold he couldn't work his gloves off, and Eliza had to help him. You all right? He asked her, his teeth chattering. Ask me when I can feel my feet, Eliza said. They stumbled back to the house where Thomas was waiting, pale and scared. Mary had come over from her cabin and had hot coffee and soup ready. They sat around the kitchen wrapped in blankets, drinking soup that burned their throats and slowly, painfully, warming up. That was the stupidest thing I've ever done, Miguel said. Second stupidest, Frank corrected. Remember that time you tried to wrestle a bull? I was drunk. You were stupid. Despite everything, the exhaustion, the fear, the cold still seeping out of her bones, Eliza laughed. And once she started, she couldn't stop. It was partly relief and partly hysteria and partly the sheer absurdity of nearly dying to save cows in a blizzard. Caleb pulled her against his side, and she buried her face in his shoulder, laughing and shaking and alive. You rode into that storm for me, he said quietly, under the others' conversation. I told you, I'm your partner. You're more than that, Caleb said. You're the bravest person I know. I'm not brave. I was terrified the entire time. That's what makes it brave. The storm finally broke on the 5th day. The world emerged white and pristine and deadly beautiful. The sun reflecting off snow was so bright it hurt to look at. The temperature stayed brutally cold, but at least the wind had stopped trying to kill them. They spent the next week digging out, clearing paths to the barns and outbuildings, breaking ice on water sources, checking the herd for injuries and frostbite, repairing the fence that had failed. Frank estimated they'd lost about 15 head total, the 10 from the storm, plus 5 more that had succumbed to cold or injury after. It was a loss, but not a catastrophic one. Could have been worse, he said, surveying the surviving cattle. Could have been a lot worse. If you two hadn't gone out there, we'd have lost 50, maybe more. It was stupid, Caleb said. It was necessary. Frank looked at Eliza. And your wife's got more grit than half the cowboys I've known. December crawled toward Christmas. Eliza tried to make it special for Thomas. She baked cookies with their dwindling sugar supply and carved small decorations from wood scraps. On Christmas Eve, they sat around the fire and she read aloud from the pirate book they'd finally finished, starting it over from the beginning because Thomas wanted to hear it again. Mother never read the same book twice, Thomas said sleepily. She said it was boring. Some stories get better when you hear them again, Eliza said. You notice things you missed the first time. Like what? Like how the pirate captain was actually scared the whole time, but he kept going anyway. I didn't catch that the first time through. Thomas considered this. Father says being brave means doing things even when you're scared. Your father's right. Are you scared? Thomas asked. Of winter? Eliza thought about lying, giving him the comfort of thinking the adults had everything under control. But Thomas deserved honesty. Sometimes, she said, winter's dangerous, but we're prepared and we have each other and that makes it manageable. I'm glad you're here, Thomas said. Me too. He fell asleep against her shoulder. Caleb carried him upstairs, and when he came back down, he found Eliza standing at the window, looking at stars so bright and numerous they seemed close enough to touch. What are you thinking? Caleb asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. That a year ago, I was in Kansas scrubbing chamber pots and feeling sorry for myself, Eliza said. And now I'm here, and I've never been happier, and that's strange because objectively, my life is harder now. But better, Caleb said. But better, she agreed, because it's mine, because I chose it, because I'm not invisible anymore. You were never invisible, Caleb said. People just refuse to see you. There's a difference. January brought more storms, but they were prepared now. February was calving season, which meant checking the herd every 4 hours around the clock. Eliza learned to assist with difficult births, learned which signs meant trouble, learned to make quick decisions that meant the difference between life and death for both cow and calf. She was exhausted constantly, running on coffee and determination, but she'd never felt more capable. One frozen morning in late February, a cow was struggling with a breech birth. The calf was stuck. The cow was weakening, and Frank was up with the northern herd. It was just Eliza and Caleb in the barn, working by lamplight while their breath fogged the air. I need to turn it, Caleb said, his arm already inside the cow up to his shoulder. But I can't get the angle. My arm's too thick. Let me try, Eliza said. He looked at her doubtfully. You've never done this. Then talk me through it. He did, his voice calm and steady while she worked her arm inside, feeling for the calf's legs, trying to turn it. The cow bellowed in pain and fear. Eliza's arm burned from the angle and the effort. Sweat ran down her face despite the cold. Got it, she said finally, feeling the calf shift. I think... Yes, the legs are coming first now. Between the two of them, they pulled the calf free. It came out in a rush of fluid, landing in the straw limp and still. Eliza's heart sank. But Caleb was already rubbing it down with straw, clearing its nose and mouth. Come on, he muttered. Come on, breathe. The calf's sides heaved once, twice. Then it coughed and took a shuddering breath. Eliza nearly collapsed with relief. You did good, Caleb said, grinning at her. His face was smeared with blood and birth fluid and straw. She probably looked the same. Real good. We did good, Eliza corrected. They left the cow to bond with her calf and walked back to the house through snow that crunched under their boots. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky pink and gold. Smoke rose from the chimney. Inside, Thomas would be waking up, starting his day. This was her life now. Hard work and harsh weather and constant challenges. But it was honest work. It mattered. She mattered. March brought the first real thaw. The snow began retreating, revealing dead grass and mud. The days lengthened, the cattle moved out of winter pastures, and the hands started preparing for spring planting. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Kansas. Eliza recognized her sister Sarah's handwriting. She almost didn't open it. Whatever was inside couldn't be good. But curiosity won. The letter was brief and awkward. Sarah was getting married, to the minister's son, as planned. Margaret had moved to St. Louis with her salesman, though the marriage was apparently rocky. Caroline had found a position as a governess in Boston, which everyone pretended was a respectable job and not an admission that she'd failed to catch a husband. And their mother wanted to know if Eliza would come visit, or send money. The house needed repairs they couldn't afford. Eliza read it twice, feeling nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity. Just nothing. These people who'd occupied so much of her emotional energy for so long were strangers now. Their lives had moved on without her. Hers had moved on without them. Bad news? Caleb asked, noticing her expression. Not really. Just my past reminding me it exists. She folded the letter and set it aside. My mother wants money. Are you going to send it? Eliza thought about it, about 23 years of being treated like a burden, about the cruel joke that had sent her photograph to Montana as a prank, about walking out that door with nothing but a canvas bag and refusing to look back. No, she said. They made their choice. I made mine. You sure? I'm sure. She looked at him. I'm not that person anymore. The one who apologized for existing. I don't owe them anything. Caleb pulled her close. No, you don't. She wrote back a polite, brief letter congratulating Sarah on her wedding and wishing them well. She included no money and no invitation to visit. She signed it with her married name, Eliza Mercer, like a declaration of independence. By April, winter had finally released its grip. The valley exploded with life, grass growing, flowers blooming, calves bouncing through pastures on legs still learning coordination. The snow retreated to just the highest peaks, and the air warmed enough that Eliza could work outside without her heavy coat. She was in the garden one morning, planting seeds for the new season, when she felt it. A wave of nausea so strong she had to stop working and sit down in the dirt. Mary, who was helping with the planting, looked at her with knowing eyes. How long since your last monthly? Mary asked quietly. Eliza counted back and felt her stomach drop for reasons that had nothing to do with nausea. Almost 3 months. Thought so. You've got that look. Mary patted her shoulder. Congratulations. We haven't... Eliza's mind was racing. We've been careful. Careful doesn't always work, Mary said pragmatically. And from what I've seen, you two haven't been that careful since Denver. She was right. After they'd admitted their feelings, after they'd stopped pretending this was just business, they'd stopped being careful about much of anything, too caught up in finally having something real to worry about consequences. Does Caleb know? Mary asked. No, I just realized myself. Well, you should probably tell him. Eliza sat in the garden dirt, surrounded by seeds that would grow into food for winter, and tried to process this news. A baby, growing inside her, after watching Catherine die in childbirth, after seeing Caleb's face when he talked about losing both wife and child. She was terrified. That night she waited until Thomas was asleep and they were alone in their bedroom. Caleb was reviewing supply orders, and she sat on the edge of the bed, trying to figure out how to say the words. I'm pregnant, she finally said. Just like that. No buildup, no softening. Caleb's pen stopped moving. He set it down very carefully and turned to look at her. His face had gone pale. You're sure? Pretty sure. Mary noticed before I did. He was quiet for a long moment. Too long. Eliza's fear intensified. Say something, she said. I don't know what to say. His voice was rough. Catherine died giving birth. The baby died. I watched it happen and couldn't do anything to stop it. I know. And now you're... He stopped, swallowed hard. I can't lose you too. Eliza moved to kneel in front of him, taking his hands. You won't. You don't know that. No, I don't. But I'm not Catherine. She squeezed his hands. I'm strong. I've survived everything Montana's thrown at me. I'll survive this too. Women die in childbirth all the time out here, Caleb said. His eyes were bright with fear. Strong women, capable women. It doesn't matter how tough you are when something goes wrong. Then we'll make sure nothing goes wrong. Eliza kept her voice steady even though she was shaking inside. We'll get the doctor from town. We'll prepare. We'll do everything right. And if it's not enough, then you'll raise our child and tell them stories about how their mother rode into blizzards and outsmarted land speculators and refused to be broken by anything. She touched his face. But it will be enough, I promise. Don't promise that, Caleb said roughly. Catherine promised too. I'm not Catherine, Eliza repeated. Stop comparing me to her. He pulled her up onto his lap and held her so tight she could barely breathe. She felt him shaking, felt his fear pressing against her like something physical. I love you, he said into her hair. I can't. I just got you. I can't lose you. You won't, Eliza said with more certainty than she felt. I'm too stubborn to die. Spring moved towards summer. Eliza's body changed in ways both fascinating and uncomfortable. The nausea faded but was replaced by exhaustion and back pain and a dozen other small miseries. She kept working. Mary said activity was good, sitting around was bad. But she had to modify what she could do. No more riding up to check the summer herd. No more heavy lifting. No more anything that made Caleb look at her with that expression of controlled panic. Thomas was excited about having a sibling, asking endless questions about when the baby would arrive and whether it would be a boy or girl, and if they could teach it to read as soon as possible. Babies can't read, Eliza explained. They can't do much of anything at first. Then why do people want them? Thomas asked with the brutal logic of an 8-year-old. Because they're potential, Eliza said. They're a promise that life keeps going. The doctor came out from Clearwater in July to examine her. He was an older man named Carson who'd been delivering babies in Montana for 30 years. He checked her over with professional efficiency and declared everything normal. You're healthy. The baby's healthy. You should do fine, he said. But I'll plan to be here for the birth. When are you due? Late October, best I can figure, Carson nodded. Send word when labor starts. I'll come as quickly as I can. After he left, Caleb paced the kitchen like a caged animal. Late October. That's winter. What if there's already snow? What if he can't get through? Then Mary will help. She's delivered 5 of her own and half the babies in the valley. That's not the same as having a doctor. Caleb, Eliza caught his arm, stopping his pacing. I need you to trust me. Trust that I'm strong enough. Trust that this will work out. Because if you spend the next 3 months paralyzed by fear, you're going to make yourself sick. I'm trying, he said. I know. Try harder. The summer social that year was hosted by the new family that had bought Warren Hale's abandoned properties, a pleasant couple from Ohio with 3 daughters, and no interest in valley politics. Eliza and Caleb attended, her pregnancy now obvious enough that several women offered congratulations with varying degrees of sincerity. Clara Beaumont was there with her new husband, a stiff banker who looked uncomfortable in frontier clothes. Clara had gained some weight and lost some of her edge. She nodded politely at Eliza, but didn't approach. Agnes Beaumont was less gracious. I hope you survive childbirth, Mrs. Mercer, she said with false sweetness. It would be such a tragedy if Caleb lost another wife. I plan to survive, Eliza said. Out of spite, if nothing else. Agnes's face flushed. How crude. How honest, Eliza corrected and walked away. By September, she was enormous and miserable. Everything hurt. She couldn't sleep lying down anymore, had to prop herself up with pillows. Walking any distance left her breathless. Even Thomas's enthusiastic reading requests exhausted her. I look like I swallowed a cow, she complained to Mary. You look like you're growing a human, Mary said. Which you are. Stop complaining and sit down before you fall down. The first snow came in mid-October, 2 weeks before the baby was due. Just a dusting, but enough to make Caleb start checking the road to town obsessively, making sure it was still passable. The baby might not come exactly on time, Eliza pointed out. Could be early, could be late. It'll be early, Caleb said with the grim certainty of someone preparing for disaster. And there'll be a blizzard, and the doctor won't make it, and, Stop, Eliza said. Just stop. You're borrowing trouble. But she was worried too, though she tried not to show it. Labor started on a Tuesday morning in late October, 3 days before the date Dr. Carson had predicted. Eliza woke to cramping that started mild and progressively got worse. By noon, the contractions were regular enough that Mary sent word to town. Dr. Carson arrived by mid-afternoon, his horse lathered from the hard ride. "Where is she?" "Upstairs," Caleb said. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "How bad is it?" "Won't know until I examine her." Carson headed upstairs with his medical bag while Caleb paced below. Frank had taken Thomas to his cabin for the day. "Kid doesn't need to hear what childbirth sounds like," he'd said, which Eliza appreciated. The labor was long, longer than she'd expected. Hours blurred together in waves of pain that crested and receded, until she lost track of time and place and everything except the work her body was doing. Mary stayed with her, coaching her through contractions. Dr. Carson checked periodically, his face professionally neutral. Caleb was allowed in the room once, and Eliza saw his fear so naked and raw that she made Mary send him back out. "He can't watch this," she gasped between contractions. "He's going to make himself sick." "Men," Mary said in disgust, "useless during the important parts." Night fell. The contractions intensified to the point where Eliza couldn't think between them, couldn't do anything but endure. She was exhausted beyond anything she'd ever felt, exhausted and scared and in more pain than she'd thought possible. "I can't do this," she said at one point, delirious with exhaustion. "Yes, you can," Mary said firmly. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. You're strong enough." "I'm not." "Yes, you are. Now shut up and push." So she pushed, and screamed, and pushed some more. And somewhere around midnight, when she was convinced she was going to die and take the baby with her, something shifted and the doctor said, "One more. Give me one more good push." She gave him everything she had left. And then there was a baby crying, and Mary was laughing, and Dr. Carson was saying, "Healthy girl, strong lungs." Eliza collapsed back against the pillows, too exhausted to move. They cleaned the baby and wrapped her in a blanket and placed her in Eliza's arms. A tiny, red, squalling creature with dark hair and her father's serious expression. "She's perfect," Mary said. Eliza looked at this person she'd made, this impossible thing, and felt something crack open in her chest. "Go get Caleb," she said. He came in looking like he'd been through a war. His face was pale, his eyes were bloodshot, his hands were shaking. But when he saw Eliza alive and holding their daughter, something in him broke. He crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside the bed, staring at the baby like he couldn't quite believe she was real. "She's here," he said stupidly. "She's here," Eliza agreed, "and we're both alive. Told you I was too stubborn to die." Caleb made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You did. You actually did it. We did it." She shifted the baby so he could see her better. "Want to hold your daughter?" He took the baby with trembling hands, cradling her like she was made of glass. The baby opened her eyes, dark blue, unfocused, and made a small sound. "She's beautiful," Caleb said. "She's red and wrinkled. She's perfect." He looked at Eliza with eyes full of wonder and relief and love. "You're both perfect." They named her Anne Catherine Mercer, Anne for Eliza's grandmother, Catherine for the woman who'd come before. It felt right to honor the past while building toward the future. Thomas met his sister the next morning, approaching with the kind of cautious reverence usually reserved for wild animals. "She's so small." "You were that small once," Caleb said. "Was I that loud?" "Louder," Eliza said. Thomas studied his sister with serious concentration. "I think she looks like father." "Poor girl," Eliza murmured. Caleb bumped her shoulder gently. "I heard that." Recovery was slow. Eliza had expected to bounce back quickly. She'd bounced back from everything else. But childbirth took something out of her that hard work never had. She was weak and tired and emotionally raw in ways she didn't know how to process. The baby cried constantly, needed feeding constantly. Eliza spent her days in an exhausted haze, operating on instinct and whatever energy she could scrape together. "I don't know what I'm doing," she confessed to Mary one afternoon, while Anne screamed for no apparent reason. "I can't get her to stop crying." "Nobody knows what they're doing with the first one," Mary said calmly. She took the baby, checked her diaper, felt her forehead. "She's fine. Just fussy. Some babies are." Thomas was quiet. "This one's expressing opinions early." What if I'm bad at this? You're not bad at it. You're just tired and scared and learning. Mary handed the baby back. Give yourself time. You learn to ride in mountains and outsmart land speculators. You can learn to raise a daughter. Slowly, gradually, things settled into a new rhythm. The baby's crying became less mysterious. Eliza learned to read the different sounds, understand what Anne needed. The exhaustion remained but became manageable. And in the quiet moments, usually late at night when it was just her and the baby and the sound of Caleb breathing beside her, Eliza felt something like peace. Winter arrived properly in December. This time, Eliza watched it from inside, nursing her daughter while Caleb and the hands managed the outdoor work. She chafed at the confinement sometimes. Being stuck inside felt like a return to invisibility. But Thomas kept her company, and Mary visited regularly, and Caleb came in throughout the day to check on them. "How are my girls?" he'd ask, and Eliza would show him whatever minor miracle Anne had accomplished, smiling, tracking objects with her eyes, grabbing Eliza's finger and holding on. "She's strong," Caleb said, watching his daughter grip his thumb with surprising force, like her mother. "She'll need to be," Eliza said, "growing up out here. She'll do fine. She's got good examples." He looked at Eliza. "And a mother who won't let Montana break her." By spring, when Anne was 6 months old and the valley was greening up again, Eliza was ready to get back to work. She started small, helping with the garden, managing the household accounts, teaching Thomas mathematics while Anne napped in a basket nearby. The ranch had survived another winter. They had money from the railroad sale to make improvements, new fencing, better equipment, an expansion to the barn. The herd was healthy. Thomas was reading at a level 3 years above his age. Anne was growing fast and loud and opinionated, and Eliza had survived too. Not just survived, thrived. She'd proved she could live through the hardest things Montana could throw at her and come out stronger. One morning in May, a year and a half after she'd stepped off that train in Clearwater, Eliza stood on the porch watching Caleb work with the horses while Thomas played nearby and Anne dozed against her shoulder. Mary came up beside her. "You look content." "I am," Eliza said. "Is that strange? That I'm happier here doing hard work in the middle of nowhere than I ever was in civilization?" "Not strange at all." Mary leaned against the railing. "Some people need comfort. Some people need purpose. You needed a place that valued you for what you could do instead of how you looked." "I got more than that," Eliza said. "I got a family, a real one." "Yes, you did," Mary smiled. "And you built it yourself, which makes it better than anything handed to you." That summer, they hosted the annual social again. This time, Eliza wasn't trying to prove anything. She simply threw open the ranch to the valley, served good food, and let people enjoy themselves without pressure or pretense. More people came than the previous year. Some came out of curiosity, wanting to meet the baby, wanting to see how Eliza had settled in. Some came because they'd heard stories about the mail-order bride who'd outsmarted Warren Hale and survived Montana's worst winter in a decade. And some came because, over the past 18 months, Eliza had quietly become a fixture of the valley. When younger women married and moved to the frontier, they came to her for advice. When families struggled, she helped however she could. When someone needed straight talk instead of platitudes, she provided it. She'd stopped trying to be Catherine, stopped trying to be anyone except herself. And somehow, that was enough. Clara Beaumont attended with her husband, and this time when she approached Eliza, there was something almost like respect in her expression. "Your daughter's beautiful," Clara said. "Thank you." "I heard you had a difficult labor." "I survived." Clara was quiet for a moment. "I owe you an apology for the things I said and did when you first arrived. It was petty and cruel, and you didn't deserve it." Eliza looked at this woman who'd tried so hard to make her feel small. "You were angry. I understand that." "It wasn't your fault Caleb didn't choose me." "No," Eliza agreed. "It wasn't." "For what it's worth," Clara said, "I think he made the right choice. You've been good for him, good for the valley." It wasn't quite friendship, but it was something. A truce, maybe. An acknowledgement that they could both exist in the same space without warfare. "Thank you," Eliza said. That evening, after everyone had left and Thomas had gone to bed, and Anne was finally asleep, Eliza and Caleb sat on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I've been thinking," Caleb said. "Dangerous habit." He smiled. I want to expand the ranch. Not the land. We've got enough land. But the operation. Build better facilities. Maybe start breeding horses in addition to cattle. Create something that lasts, that Thomas and Anne can inherit someday. That's ambitious, Eliza said. We've got the railroad money, and we've proved we can survive anything Montana throws at us. He looked at her. But I need a partner who's all in, someone willing to work toward building something bigger than just survival. You have that partner, Eliza said. You've had her since Denver. I know. He took her hand. I just wanted to make sure you knew what you were signing up for. More work, more challenges, more years of Montana trying to kill us. I survived your sisters, your ranch, your winter, and giving birth to your daughter, Eliza said. I think I can handle whatever comes next. Caleb pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence while the night settled around them. Eliza thought about the girl she'd been 18 months ago. Invisible, desperate, convinced her plainness meant worthlessness. That girl had boarded a train west expecting nothing more than a different kind of servitude. She'd found so much more than that. She'd found strength she didn't know she had. She'd found work that mattered. She'd found a place where courage counted more than beauty, where capability trumped appearances, where being honest and tough and stubborn was valued over being decorative. She'd found love, real love, the kind built on respect and partnership, and choosing each other every day despite difficulty. She'd found herself. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her sisters had sent her photograph as a cruel joke, never imagining it would lead to anything good. They'd expected rejection and humiliation. They'd wanted her to fail. Instead, their cruelty had accidentally saved her. It had pushed her out of Kansas and into Montana. It had forced her into a situation where she had to be strong or die. It had given her the chance to prove, to herself more than anyone, that she was worth something beyond her appearance. Sometimes the worst things people do to you become the catalyst for the best things in your life. Not because the cruelty was justified, but because survival requires finding strength you didn't know you possessed. What are you thinking? Caleb asked. That I should write my sisters a thank you letter, Eliza said. For what? For being horrible enough to send me here. She tilted her head back to look at the stars. If they'd been kind, I'd still be in Kansas scrubbing floors and feeling sorry for myself. I'd have never known what I was capable of. Their loss, Caleb said. Definitely their loss. Eliza smiled. And definitely my gain. They sat there until the cold drove them inside, and Eliza took one last look at the mountains surrounding the ranch, dark shapes against a star-filled sky. This place had tested her in every way possible. It had demanded everything she had to give, and then demanded more. But it had also given her something precious, a life that belonged to her. A family she'd built. A future she'd earned through grit and determination and refusing to accept the limitations other people put on her. She'd come to Montana as an unwanted bride, the punchline to a cruel joke. She'd become the heart of a ranch, the mother of a daughter, the wife of a man who loved her exactly as she was. She'd become someone worth knowing, worth loving, worth the hard work of survival. And in the end, that was worth every frozen morning, every difficult birth, every storm that tried to break her. Because she hadn't just survived Montana. She'd conquered it. Not through beauty or charm or any of the things her sisters possessed, but through the one thing she'd always had and never recognized until it was tested. Unbreakable strength born from a lifetime of being underestimated and a stubborn refusal to accept that plain meant powerless. She'd proven them all wrong. And she'd do it again, every day for the rest of her life, for as long as these mountains stood and this harsh, honest land demanded her best. Because Eliza Mercer, once Whitmore, once nobody, once the girl sent west as a joke, had finally found the one place in the world where she didn't have to be beautiful to matter. She just had to be herself. And that, it turned out, was more than enough.